So this is the 6th session of our food systems track covering digitalization and innovation. Now, before we begin, I would like to draw your attention to our Let's Talk About Digitalization and Innovation booth. You can find it at the bottom. It's a little icon that says Expo. There you will have the opportunity to interact directly with an expert right on stage. So stay tuned until the end to join Mr. Kerem Erixi from Tarla.io, who will share lessons learned in terms of business development and trends in innovation. Now, before we begin to break the ice, we would like to start with a very quick interactive poll. So on the right side of your screen, there is a tab called Slido. Now, if you click on it, you will see a question and 3 answers. So please make sure to send in your response within the next hour, and we will regroup after the breakout room discussions to take a look at the results. So the question for the poll is, what is the priority for increasing the uptake of digital technologies that enable energy use in food systems? Now, if you didn't hear me correctly or you want to read it again, just again, click on the Slido tab to the right of your screen and select your answer. Now, to begin with today's program, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Alois Mlanga. He is the Chief of the Climate Technology Innovation Division in the Department of Energy here at UNIDO. So we're letting him in the platform. It seems like he's still connecting. Hi, Alois.
Hi, Annalisa. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine. Great.
Okay, thank you for joining.
Thank you so much. We are ready to go?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, good morning, colleagues, and good evening. And thank you for joining this VEF Virtual Series, the 6th version focused on digitalization and innovation in food systems. UNIDO, in cooperation with the Vienna Energy Forum partners, launched the VEF Virtual Series in October 2020 as a platform for discussing the role of sustainable energy and innovation in driving development in end-use sectors that include industry, food systems and products. On behalf of UNIDO, I'm pleased to welcome you all to the 6th session of the food systems track, which will focus on digitalization and innovation in food systems. The Sustainable Development Goals call for the eradication of poverty and hunger, the advancement of sustainable agriculture and inclusive economic growth, and the provision of universal energy access by 2030. During this period, the global population will increase significantly, leading to a 50% growth in agricultural demand by 2030 compared to that of 2013. If the SDGs are to be achieved, food systems must change in a sustainable way that responds to the reality of climate change and supports gender equity. While food systems around the world are undergoing a transformation, the pace of change and the implementation outcomes, challenges and opportunities vary considerably across countries. You understand that energy plays a key role along the value chain for food production, starting from crop production, storage and handling, use of bioenergy across food systems, and promoting circularity and digitalization. Today's session explores the role of digital technologies in agribusinesses to improve the efficiency, reliability, and accessibility of energy along the food systems value chains. Digital technologies boost the effectiveness of sustainable energy technologies to drive food system transformation. From Nexus approach, sustainable energy technologies can unlock the benefits of digitalization in food systems that include such as climate resilience, higher incomes, higher yields, by supplying power to the hardware and software tools. To meet the goals of the 2030 development agenda, we need to deliver integrated solutions and partnership at scale and speed. UNIDO places emphasis on the role of the food system transformation and agribusiness development and tackles that through its programs that support the development of a sustainable agribusiness sector. We are keen to explore here with you the common challenges that are preventing progress and the remaining opportunities. I'm quite confident that the discussion here today will help us deliver recommendations to keep us on track with our development and climate targets. Let me then take the opportunity to invite the scene-setting presentation that will be delivered by Mr. Tobias Engelmeyer from TFE Energy. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, Tobias, please.
Hello. Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be able to speak here today. Let me share my presentation. Right. Good. So we're talking about digitalization in energy and food systems. And our background is more in the energy side. So my perspective will be a little more tilted towards energy. But as Alois was saying, the key thing is that the nexus, the linkage between energy and food systems is just beginning to be fully explored in my experience. And it is absolutely crucial for both sides of the equation, because for the energy companies, they need anchor loads, they need off-takers, they need, if they go into off-grid regions, they need to find customers that can off-take a large amount of energy and pay for that. And that requires that the energy helps them increase their productivity, which is typically the case in the field of agriculture, which is the main source of income in many of these areas. And inversely, of course, agriculture needs energy in order to move from a subsistence level to a more productive level, to contribute to economic growth, to enable climate resilience, which is an important factor. So both of these are very, very closely connected. And then we're here adding the third element, which is digitalization, which can bracket them together a little bit. So, the problem is well understood, I suppose. There are still, depending on how you count it, but I'm giving a number of 860 million people today who live without electricity. If you talk about quality electricity, which is electricity that allows people to reliably use machinery and create and access modern types of work, then this number can go up to as much as 3 billion. Now, at the minimum, to bring electricity to everybody, we need around 400 billion in investment until 2030 to achieve our goals. And we're not on track to do that. The investment isn't coming in, the growth rates aren't high enough. One of the biggest problems is that as much as these markets we're working in are in the dark, the investors and planners are also working in the dark, because they have very, very little information to make informed decisions on. And because of this lack of evidence on rural households and business needs, all project and business development times are very long, operational margins are slow, some investments are stranded, and access to finance is restricted because we're not able to reach the kind of the scale that makes this attractive from a transaction point of view and from a profitability point of view to investors the world over. Now, at the same time, as you all know, we're in the middle of an absolutely breathtaking acceleration in the availability and the amount of data we have with us all around us, and what we can do with that data. And data sets are increasing. You see that in the bottom of this slide. That's on the right-hand side is the data from 2017 to the current data bullet wouldn't even fit on this slide anymore. Now, the data sets are different ones. We're talking about IoT data that comes from machines, for example, from mini grids, to give an example of electricity, or from water pumps. It can be data sets that come from mobile usage and internet usage, or it can be data sets, for example, like satellite imagery, which is very rapidly expanding in its own domain. At the same time, processing power is becoming hugely better. That's a function of the well-known Moore's law. So we can deal with these huge data sets in an ever better way. Similarly to that, we're building more and more AI techniques and algorithms that we can apply to these processes. And what's very important also, and I've experienced that in my own work, is that there is a really interesting new or emerging global pool of talents. The people who can work on the data, who can program, code, develop algorithms, they are no longer coming from a couple of elite universities, but they are popping up all over the world, especially also in the countries where we are working to improve energy access. Now, we've looked at this in last year, 2020. We've looked at we've published a report on how data is used in energy access, and it's available on the website. The link is there, but we've looked at it from the perspective of how it reduces costs, how it reduces risks, and how it can accelerate, enable scale. We categorized we looked at around 300 companies that are active. By now, I'm sure there will be many more. And we categorized them in 4 buckets. One of them was digital planning tools, which I'm going to talk about a little bit on the next slide, because that's the work we are currently doing. A second bucket is digital platforms that basically aggregate data and information and make that available to different users. For example, investors. A crowdfunding platform is some kind of aggregator. Another aggregator is a company like Odyssey Energy Solutions. There are different types of aggregators that create these platforms. A third one is digital operations. So there you see a lot of smart metering, for example, and that is being implemented, that allows us to significantly improve the operational cost, but also learn much more. So one of the key things in all these data solutions is that we're creating a new level of transparency in our everyday work that allows us to progress our knowledge about what works and what doesn't work. So we can learn from mistakes, which I fear in the past we haven't done enough. A fourth one that we looked at is digital payments, which is the most mature probably. And there are all kinds of PayGops providers, and there are people who are implementing blockchain technologies in certain cases. There are analysts who build data analytical tools based on the payment systems. So these are the 4 different ecosystems that we have identified in this market. And I invite you to download the report and have a look at it if you're interested in it. So let me just give you an example of what we are currently doing, which is an example of a digital planning tool. So we found that learning about the places where we want to invest, whether that's in food systems or energy, you need to go and send somebody to look. You need to do a survey typically, and the survey is a lengthy process. It's a slow process. It's an expensive process, and it's a very unreliable process. The kind of data that we, from our own surveys that we've conducted, got is very bad in many cases. And every time we interact with surveys, we find that the data is very unreliable. So we tackled that specific problem with our tool Village Data Analytics, which is a software that can analyze any village anywhere in the world and predict electrification options. And electrification for food systems and productive uses is a key component of that. And we've developed algorithms to, first of all, identify where people live, identify villages. We then extract village level information, such as on settlement structure, grid access. We've developed our own algorithm to learn where people are connected to the grid and where they're not. We look at agriculture, road infrastructure, various other things. Then we apply a number of algorithms to these data sets, and we predict energy demand and investment viability of, for example, mini grids. That's the example you see on the screenshot. And then this is displayed in a user interface that allows a user to change parameters and create subsections and subsets of the data. Our goal was to move from a pure visualization, a data visualization tool, to create a tool that is near real-time, precise, and supports decision-making, which requires an analysis at the level of granularity where decisions are made, and we identified that as being the village. And it's scalable. So in this case, you see an analysis of the country of Ethiopia. And then you can zoom in to each one of these villages. In Ethiopia, we've identified over 1,800 villages. And then for each village, you can get there's a detailed view that gives you a certain set of characteristics about the village that enable data-based investment decisions to happen. And then we go a level deeper where we actually start to, in this case, outline what a mini-grid could look like. And that helps us understand what the cost of a mini-grid would be. You wouldn't necessarily want to connect everybody to a mini-grid, but you might want to connect a denser core to the mini-grid. You want to understand where productive uses might happen. That's especially agricultural processing. Then you can have a kind of cost calculation, and then you compare that with a demand estimation, and that gives you an overall viability. And that's something we're doing with development institutions and with mini-grid and solar home system companies. So I'll stop here. I think I've kind of finished my time, but I'll be in one of the discussion groups as well for any questions, and I'm happy to take questions here. I don't know what the protocol is on that, actually. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tobias. This is an incredible example of how, to actually bring in technology into these nexus between food systems and energy. And I think it's a great introduction from everybody that is watching to move on to the breakout room. So thank you so much. So now I will invite everybody to our breakout rooms. So we have 3 today. Global Perspectives, moderated by Patrick Nussbaumer from UNIDO, with representatives from the Alliance for Rural Electrification, Wageningen University, the Ban Ki-moon Center, and BASE. We have Country Voices, moderated by Katie Kennedy from the World Bank, with representatives from Drop Access, Inseco, Africa Green Tech, Sun Culture, and Tarla.io. And we have Enablers for Progress, moderated by Alexander Hack from NDEP Global, with representatives from SunFunder, SIDA, Power for All, and Village Data Analytics. So you may access them by clicking on the series button to the left. So to our speakers, please enter your assigned breakout room. And to our participants, please feel free to virtually walk around our different rooms and select the one that you're most interested in. So thank you so much for joining. I wish you all great discussions.
Welcome, everyone. I presume that we are live now. I would like to take the opportunity to welcome everyone and greet everyone to this breakout session. Global perspective is what we are expected to take to discuss a better alignment of the energy transition with the food system transformation, with a particular focus on developing countries. My name is Patrick Nussbaumer. I'm working for the Department of Energy at UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, where I design and implement technical cooperation interventions in developing countries. As we start this discussion, I just would like to frame it in the spirit of the Vienna Energy Forum, which is to attend to discuss practical solutions and approaches with a means to inform policy decisions. So as practical as we can be this afternoon during this discussion, the more useful it's going to be, I believe, for the outcome of this session. We will be looking at the impact of digitalization is having on and will have in the future in food systems, and that from an energy perspective, as we have heard an illustrative example during the introduction. To me, there are 2 dimensions there. On the one hand, my feeling in the work that we are doing is that digitalization is opening the door for a range of solutions to deal with the challenges that we are facing that were unthinkable only a couple of years ago. So those solutions become accessible, they become attractive, they become appealing, and they become commercially viable. On the other hand, I think digitalization is creating a very significant disruption, which I hope we can discuss in the context of this panel. And if we look at waves of innovation from a historical perspective, I think we realize that the one that we are in at the moment is different in terms of the pace and the amplitude of the changes that are being created. So we would like to structure this session as a moderated discussion amongst 4 experts coming from business association, academia, and implementation agencies. And as we go through the discussions, I would like to invite the audience to interject and ask questions through the chat that I will hopefully pick up and share with the distinguished panelists. When we are finished with this discussion, as you know, we will go back to the plenary and share the main takeaways of this discussion with the colleagues from the other breakout sessions. So without further ado, I will start by thanking the panelists for agreeing to take some of their precious time to come with us and share some of their insights. I will start by turning to Deepak Mohapatra, who is a policy and business development officer at the Alliance for Rural Electrification. ARE is a global business association representing the decentralized renewable energy sector for provision of energy access in developing and emerging countries. So Deepak, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Deepak, I would like to start by asking you, in the context of food systems transformation, where should digitalization be a priority for productive users of energy?
Thank you. Thank you so much first of all, for inviting me and for having me in this panel. Very happy to be sharing this panel with so many intellectuals. Well, I did think of this answer while I was listening to the scene setting presentation. The approach that Tobias took was more concretely towards the energy sector as a whole. For example, digital planning tools, digital platforms, operations, and payments. So that part is somehow covered. So I would take another approach from the view of the global food systems. Now, when we think of the food systems as a whole, it includes production, harvesting, processing, distribution, and storage. Now, let me touch upon all of them one by one. When we think of production, and we can include also harvesting in that, if we, let's say, if we go back sometime in a couple of centuries back, we saw the industrial revolutions, which fully transitioned the agricultural production and practices from human and animal powered to machine powered, and to nowadays machine which are automated, and they're powered by its own by doing device to device connections. And that shows the growth that the humanity or that we have achieved so far to ensure mass production, to feed the rising global population, and on one hand, on other hand, to enable national and international trade, phasing out the localization of food and making that no food is kind of exclusive to any certain market nowadays. Everyone, everywhere have access to like any food. I mean, I'm being placed in Europe right now. I can see the tropical mangoes from my own country back home. And that is something like really amazing to see. And thanks to this global trade and the digitalization, which is kind of enabling that. Now, coming to the second element of it, which is processing, the agri-processing. Productive use concept, it can be touched upon with a very good example when it comes to agro-processing. A very simple innovation in that part would be the rice milling units, which are powered by renewable energy microgrids or renewable energy powered power systems, and enabled with remote monitoring to ensure proper operation and maintenance of that system. Now, what had happened, it empowered a local farmer or local stakeholder there in that local community that has access to energy, that it can that they can connect it to a rice milling unit and have access to the food agro produce processing right at their doorstep. instead of spending the time to go travel to a nearby city to do so. Then we come to the distribution part of it. The distribution with advanced supply chain systems, automation has greatly influenced the global food system supply chain by putting, for example, very simple innovation again, the conveyor belts, for example. And that has eliminated the human chain and enhanced the fast moments of the goods and products. This has replaced the humans, of course, with smart machinery, which has enhanced the speed and precision, and also not to forget the security by doing device-to-device communication. I would also touch upon the last part of the global food systems, which is storage. As per one quote from the United Nations, nearly half of the fruit and vegetable produced globally are wasted each year. Cold storage can be a very promising solution to that. However, when those cold storage are connected, are enabled with digitalization, which have the automatic temperature control, for example, depending on the ambient conditions, by use of certain algorithms that can greatly enhance the durability of the perishable goods. So all in all, digitalization has significantly benefited the energy services and their usage in the food systems. And another important element to focus on would be the data that we collect with the help of these digitalization of all these four processes that I just mentioned. The data that we collect can provide a feedback loop to more and more research and development, thereby enhancing more and more digitalization, innovation, and techniques to provide more efficient and sustainable ways to decarbonize the sector as a whole and to make the global food system more efficient. So like I was saying, with more and more advancements like machine learning or artificial intelligence, we are looking at a bright future in the sector, which will be efficient and sustainable and will contribute to the decarbonization of the sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deepak, and fantastic illustrative examples walking us through the different steps of the food system. So thank you for your insights. I do see a couple of questions coming through the chat from the participants, and I welcome those, and I will integrate those into the questions that I'm posing to the panelists. So thank you for those. Please continue to ask questions. I will now turn to Thomas Modmans, who is a sustainable energy financial specialist at the Basel Agency for Sustainable Energy. BASE develops innovative, actionable financial strategies and market-driven solutions to unlock investment in climate change solutions. So Thomas, welcome. Good to be in touch again, and thank you for joining us. Thomas, based on your work and experience, what opportunities are there for digitalization to benefit food systems transformation? And can you please give an example of a solution you are implementing?
Thank you very much, Patrick. Hi, everyone. Actually, I thought Deepak's introduction was really good, so I'll try to build on this, maybe giving a slightly different perspective. So, as you mentioned, BASE is focused on the development of financial mechanisms. So maybe I can also give an idea of how digitalization can work hand in hand with these financial mechanisms. Well, first, I would like to emphasize that there's really two areas where I see potential for digitalization, which is on the one hand, the improvement of efficiency and speed, which is the way digitalization is currently being used, also with larger farms typically to enable scaling up of operations and optimizing, but also to redistribute information and power along the value chain. And that's also quite interesting because that's the power of data and how can we harness data to benefit those that most need it, which often are not the ones that have access to it today. And also, well, taking maybe in particular the area that we are focusing on, which is essentially financial mechanisms for climate smart technologies, including climate smart agricultural technologies. These are typically information and knowledge intensive to operate. And digitalization enables, as Deepak already mentioned, remote monitoring and remote controlling, which also makes it possible to combine these with innovative financial mechanisms, and that makes these technologies inclusive and accessible. And why? Because digitalization can make financial services more better and more inclusive, for example, by facilitating mobile payments, credit and financing in a secure and trustworthy way. And also downstream, this can be integrated with, for instance, blockchain technology, which can provide a more transparent and distributed way to perform and record transactions between many different untrusted parties, which is more and more relevant because in the agricultural food supply chain, there's a number of actors involved from farm to fork. We have, there's a number of very interesting applications, and one of them that I've recently seen was implemented by the University of California, Berkeley, where they use artificial intelligence and satellite imagery and mobile phone data to identify which farmers or which citizens are most in need of government subsidy programs. So this is one example where digitalization can massively accelerate these kind of operations at the global, or in this case, the national scale. In our case, to give an example, we are using data science to strengthen cold chains and optimize post-harvest processes, including cold storage. So that's, well, Deepak already mentioned the rationale of focusing on cold storage because there's a massive amount of food loss within the cold chain. And digitalization is today already used by larger farmers, but now we see a big potential as well to improve market access for smaller farmers. So what we're essentially doing is working hand in hand with a business model that we call cooling as a service, which enables smallholder farmers to access cold storage rooms without needing to invest in these rooms or to maintain or operate these, because very often the technical capabilities lack. And instead having the technical provider owning that equipment and operating it, and then also integrating as much digitalization as makes sense to optimize operation and reduce for example, the energy consumption, because that's what drives the cost, the life cycle cost of the equipment. It's not the actual investment, it's how much energy this consumes. And in the case of renewable energy or totally off-grid systems, it also enables the providers to make this upfront investment and to base the calculations on long-term considerations. And we are also upgrading this a little bit. So not only offering or designing a program in which we offer cooling to these smallholder farmers, but also offer access to data. So essentially, we're developing an assistant. What's a tool that will provide real-time instructions to those farmers on how to best store, or for how long to best store, and when to sell. So this essentially takes inputs from market prices, from the temperature, humidity, different types of data, and that essentially with machine learning models and physics-based modeling estimates the current quality grade of that crop, and then makes an estimation of the remaining shelf life. And this feeds into recommendations on whether it makes sense to sell now or to keep it in the cold storage. So this is information that will be integrated into this cooling as a service model, because this tool will then not be sold, but just essentially be included in this fee. So that's a little bit a brief overview and an example, and I'm happy to jump into some questions or some more discussions later.
Thanks, Thomas, for those examples and stressing the fact that dealing with post-harvest loss is a key issue that we are facing, and one that could have a huge impact. And cooling obviously has a key role to play there. And we are also well aware that cooling, not only for food systems, but as we are trying to distribute a vaccine across the world, there will also be demands from that perspective that might go hand in hand with those related to food systems. Thank you, Thomas. I would like to turn now to Maria, please. Maria Carmela Anossi is a Senior Assistant Professor of Innovation Management and Organizational Behavior at the School of Social Sciences at Wageningen University. Specifically, she researches organizational design mechanisms, organizational processes by which actors initiate and implement change. Maria, thank you for being with us. The question that I would like to pose is, Given your research and how actors deal with change, where do you see additional attention required to facilitate digitalization in food systems? And Maria, if you don't mind, be mindful of the couple of questions that are in the chat related to the digital divide and the different impacts digitalization might have, including on jobs. So if you don't mind expanding on those, if you want to, that would be welcome. Thank you.
Many thanks for your kind invitation. Invite. So I'm very glad to join this interesting discussion. My view is on innovation management when applied to the diffusion of new technology as a the digital ones is on the need, basically on the need of having a more people-centered approach, which I experienced also with some research on field as relevant to succeed in creating conditions for an endemic diffusion of digitalization. So empirical research has started revolving around the concept of system thinking and focuses on innovation system, including macro level perspective and attaching importance to institutional roles and social interaction between different stakeholders. And despite the fact that innovation has been conceived of as a continuously evolving process composed of a complex set of events, including action, decision, and behavior, only recently there has been an effort to consider the individual at the center, individual within a collective processes of technological, social organization, political, and institutional transition. Some scholars have only recently started highlighting the relevance of a people-centered approach. These scholars recall the system nature of technological innovation as a process that transforms the world of the inventor and invention alike, and whose diffusion depend on the interaction between the system seen as a whole and its element, such as the people contained by that whole. However, despite the fact that this approach has become the subject interest in several studies, there is still a tendency in the field as a whole to consider new development, such as tractors, fertilizing, hybrid seeds, and so on and so forth, as a technology per se, neglecting to explicitly connect the design and management of such innovation to the development of the social cognitive processes that allow or disallow the acceptance and usage of new technology by individuals and local conditions, practices, competencies, and culture. I would like to underline what I mean for people-centered approach. It's an approach that emphasizes the need to boost institutional and social capacity, supportive of greater local control, accountability, initiative, and resilience. So for me, according to my recent study and experience in analyzing data from field, for me is very important giving high priority to the analysis of the social cognitive processes that underline the democratization of innovation processes, where people are encouraged to mobilize and manage their own resources with the institution playing an enabling role. So, and this approach is indeed in line with the growing interest in putting people at the center of the innovation processes, the worldwide 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development explicitly emphasized that scaling up innovation in agricultural sectors requires more than new technology. It requires that multiple stakeholders adopt more effectively knowledge management practices and develop a better understanding of pathways. So government, working with academia, civil society, farming organization, private sector, need to create conditions that enable the innovation process to flourish by linking different actors and fostering the capacity of farmer and other stakeholders and provide incentives for innovation. The growing interest in people-centered approach as a frame to analyze innovation in agriculture suggests that democratizing the innovation process is a relevant phenomenon that needs to be better conceptualized and theorized on its own. Innovation and the capability to establish a decentralized system of control are unquestionably related. However, research on innovation process following this approach is still not so much. So this question has not currently been raised, managed or answered. And this is representative of the current state of research in agricultural sector literature on innovation, which offer only a fragmented vision of the relevant social cognitive processes that affect local innovation development. For instance, they lack an integrative view of them. They are just stuck in defining research on decision-making processes, knowledge management, and governance mechanism. But altogether, they should give an idea of the pathways of the needed change to affect the decision that farmer might take to adopt or not a technology. So this is what I see and what I would like to underline as a relevant need for the future research activities.
Fantastic, Maria. Thank you very much. And thank you for stressing the point that we need an approach that is centered on the individual. I think this is a key point. Maria, I will come back to you at the second round to essentially have you respond to the hypothesis on whether a people-centered approach would be a way to avoid or minimize the risk of the digital divide. But in the meantime, Catherine, thank you very much for joining us and making the time for this. Catherine Harvey is the Chief Operating Officer at the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizen. The Ban Ki-moon Center empowers women and youth to live in a peaceful and prosperous world. So it's a good segue from Maria's intervention. Catherine, from your perspective, what issues need to be given more focus to facilitate increased digitalization in energy-related activities?
Thank you very much, Patrick. And I heard some of my messages already in the previous speakers, so please forgive me if I repeat. There are 4 major points that I would like to emphasize when it comes to the issues relating to energy-related digitalization activities. And just as a quick information, our work mainly focuses on cooperation with smallholder farmers in the developing countries. So that's basically where my perspective comes in mostly. So the 4 big points are, first of all, the integration, the integrative part, which basically builds already on Maria's input. the investment and understanding of costs for digitalization and energy-related activities, the question about data collection on the one side, and the question of data analytic or database decision making, and then obviously coming from the Ban Ki-moon Center's perspective, very much on equity and equality when it comes to who uses these kinds of digital solutions in the sector. Now, when we go to integration of the digitalization, it's basically just to kind of come back to what Maria said, is what is actually needed on the ground, what is the local needs, what do individual farmers in this sense really need, and how do they use it in their daily lives, instead of just using a top-down approach of something that has worked in, sorry for this, California, and then putting it on Zambia, for example. And then also integration in a sense that looking into what is energy. Energy alone is not really the solution, is not the end of all means. It's a service, as Thomas already mentioned as well. So it's seeing energy as a service, and how does it support other things that the farmers are working on and that they need to really have a prosperous life, to thrive, and to make the food systems as a whole work. So that's the one hand. And then if we're looking at investment and cost, so the question is still, I think, if we're talking energy access particularly, and what does it actually cost for a farmer or for somebody in the developing country to use energy? What are the unit costs? And it's usually higher than what we've paid here in Europe, for example. And who covers these kinds of costs also in terms of reaching energy access, so reaching the rural areas? Is it the private sector? If it's the private sector who may be working with some subsidies, how do they act, and how do they use the data that they're collecting by offering service solutions? Also, we need to bit better understand where else we need to invest to make it work in a systems approach, saying looking at ENT systems, policies, standards and regulations. And so at the moment we see a lot of solar home systems specifically working with pay-as-you-go models, but how is that working? How is that financing? How is that financing working on a? Sorry, I just got distracted by a notification on the side here. Sorry. So that's one. So sorry, and then we're going to data collection and data-based decision making. Again, it's like, if the private sector are the ones that are providing the solutions, how are they using the data? How are they sharing it with decision makers? How do governments get access to this kinds of information? Is there enough local data at the moment? I doubt it. I think we still need more. At the moment, a lot of data and analytics that is happening is working similar to what we had in the introductory presentation on satellite data and geospatial planning. So how do we collect it, and how at the same time protect it, so that in Europe we are very lucky to be under the GDPR umbrella as individuals, but that is not the case in developing countries at the moment. So how is that data protected? And then lastly, equity and equality. It's really, really important to, if we look into providing solutions that are digitalized solutions for energy access in the food systems, we need to really understand the gender sensitive planning aspects here. There's a massive gender gap when it comes to what women do in agriculture, what is their role in the farm level, what is their role in the household level, even the difference between poverty, what does it mean for how women-led household towards a men-led household. So there's a lot of things that we still need to see, and to make sure that we really fully integrate women and gender issues as well. So yes, and then just as a closing remark, in the food systems, yes, of course, farmers are very important, but let's not forget that women are the ones that, and still in many, many countries in this world, are the ones that providing the food to their family, producing it, purchasing it, and even actually subsisting farming as well. So these are the 4 points. So the integration, investments, data, and equality.
Catherine, thank you very much. Not that I want to make a priority amongst those 4 points, but I think stressing the issue of data, particularly in a context where those data are becoming a commodity that is put on the market. So I think considerations around this are critical. Participants, attendants, I hope that you're enjoying the discussion. Again, feel free to post on the chat reactions if you agree, disagree with what is being said during the discussion, or if you have a question or would like us to address one point or the other, please do so. In the meantime, I'll turn to Deepak again, if I may, to ask you to share with us one concrete example of a successful intervention or project in the food system that has been facilitated by increased digitalization. Deepak, if you would, and if you don't mind, expanding this with some thoughts that you might want to share with us on the fact that digitalization is instrumental for more energy access, but at the same time, digitalization itself has energy requirements. So over to you, Deepak. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this question. Let me answer you that. So I'm very happy to give you not just one, but many examples of successful interventions from the ground. At ARE, we recently launched our publication on decentralized renewable energy innovations to boost agri-sector productivity and address global food system challenges, which highlighted 15 such successful interventions from different parts of the world. I am quickly sharing the link here. Okay, I'm not able to type. I guess, am I allowed to type here or no?
But we can share the link in the chat
later. Okay, sure.
As you wish.
Just wanted to share that. And it has 15 different case studies from different parts of the world, highlighting how different key innovations in the DRE sector can be helpful to empower the global food system, address the global food system challenges and improve the productivity in agriculture. As I'm to highlight one of the key examples, ARE member Testvolt has successfully implemented a smart hybrid irrigation project in one of the remote farms in Brazil. And that technology was used contained one PV system with a backup storage unit, which was enabled with remote monitoring and maintenance. And after that intervention, that farm was benefited with immediate reduction of usage of diesel, which was used to power the diesel genset to draw water from the underground for irrigation. It enhanced the access to water with more and more drinking purposes and irrigation purposes. More new crops were introduced for farming, 50 new jobs were created locally, and more than 1,000 tons of carbon dioxide emissions were avoided and reduced every year. So that has been one of the key projects, and these are the impacts that I have just outlined, which was able to achieve with the help of digitalization and a renewable energy project put together in a remote farm of Brazil. So I would again share the link with you, and please feel free to share it with the audience. I would like to invite them to have a look at. There they can find reference to many such projects. And as of ARE, we are the industry association, and we have so many members within our association who are providing different digital solutions in different walks of the sector. A couple of examples would be AMP and Ferntech and etc. So this all in all shows how digitalization can intervene to step up the efforts to facilitate the proper functioning of global food systems. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Deepak, for those concrete examples. I'm conscious of time, and I'll turn straight away to Catherine to ask, based on your experience, what would you recommend to enable the increased digitalization in energy use in food systems around the 4 pillars that you mentioned before?
Thank you. Yes, I'm going backwards now. So if we're talking, my last point is addressing inequalities. One of the obvious things to do is just building on skills development, and also for policymakers, not just for the people who actually have to use the digital solutions, but also policymakers so they can make better decisions. Trainings and capacity building and network expansions so that even the other infrastructure works as well, not just I mean, it's already great, but the digital solutions to energy access. If you're looking at data protection and data in such, on the one hand, obviously the bigger part would be regulation and making sure that there's laws in place to protect data, but also to make it a bit more coherent in terms of a policy level. Again, I mean, this is something that's not new in this kind of conversation when we're talking energy, food, water. It's breaking down the silos and ensuring that there's a cooperation between the public and the private sector who all have equal access to data, at least that we can build on this and work with this. Then there's something I call a needs-focused investment. Is like, first of all, understand the needs. What is happening? Who needs some sort of intervention? How do they need to work it? I love Thomas's comments on the cool storage, which is really working on what is actually needed. Not every farmer needs their own refrigeration unit. It's enough if they can have access to one. And then just understand the food system and the value chains. I think there's still a lot of work here where we need to really see what kind of adequate solutions could be provided to the whole value chain. Where does it make sense to come in? Do we even understand the value chains at all yet? And then go a little bit further than pay as you go for irrigation, which actually, in my opinion, should also always come with a meter for water usage, and then invest in these solutions. And then lastly, obviously, as I mentioned, have an integrated systems approach and think about, as Maria said, who has to use these things in the end. None of us want to have any kind of digital solutions or technology that we don't know how to use. It has to be intuitive. It has to work for my personal situation and my livelihood. And then build that into the business models and make sure that we have long-term and larger scale programs that work and go a little bit away from pilot projects that work in individual sectors, but maybe hopefully at some point scale it to a larger level.
Thank you, Catherine. And bouncing off that last comment, there is a question in the chat around limited market access opportunities. For example, for small-scale farmers, how do we ensure that they can adopt those new solutions based on digitalization?
I think, first of all, I think we need to give them, so one of our programs did this actually. One of our scholars has done an SDG micro project that we call in Zimbabwe. It was a young lady using geospatial data to help farmers make better decisions in terms of seed planning and harvesting and water solutions. So, and the thing is, and this is very, sounds banal, but it's really going to the field and showing how it works. And she literally used her little device that showed the digital information for the farmers and had them check it against the soil with their hands so that they make the connection, because sometimes it's a little bit far off. So I think that's something that we should think of, and it has happened, and I think solar mobile phones are already out there, so really build on things that are existing and help get the market access in that sense.
Fantastic. Thank you, Catherine. Maria, coming back to you, if I may. When we talk to our counterparts, they often come to us with mixed feelings about digitalization. On the one hand, they are super excited. On the other hand, they are scared and they are worried. Any recommendations stemming from your research on how to navigate the potential pitfall? And Maria, if you don't mind talking about this issue that has been raised on the digital divide. And sorry, I have another request. If you don't mind doing this within 4 minutes.
Okay, so we'll try to be very short. So basically what I suggest is to embrace a study that analyze the complex nature of forces which may facilitate or impede farmers to use their local resources and adopt innovation. So based on my experience, because I'm now analyzing a success story happened in India, I'm doing this collaboration project with McGill University, and is a fantastic story of analysis of all the mechanisms influencing farmers' decision to adopt a digital technology. But what we did was to approach farmer in their ecosystem. So basically, we analyzed all the mechanism created by the ecosystem of actors, meaning technology providers, micro entrepreneur acting on farmers. So basically, we looked at how technology providers structured the field of farmer. They use a mechanism for legitimating the introduction of their technology. So basically, they are creating new meaning in the farmer's life. Additionally, they also can create new institutional arrangement, integrating the technology in the farming technique of a farmer. And we also looked at the collaborative network they created around the farmer, and also the power imbalance that they created with a mechanism of resource dependency. So basically, the analysis of the forces acting on the social cognitive dimension process of farmer requires an in-depth investigation of the structure of the institutional forces acting around the farmer. So, and we are now, getting to great result, which may reveal possibility to enter and to let them adopt this new technology. And this is what I would suggest. And regarding the question, which one do you want me to answer? So I think this would also answer the question of Byron, asking me which approach should be adopted to enhance digitization. I think this would maybe somehow give an answer. So I don't know if...
I think this is good, Maria. Thank you for sharing those insights, and we can always follow up individually on those questions, as some of them I think require a little bit more elaboration. But before we close, I would like to turn to Thomas again, if I might, Thomas. We know that you, through your institution, are implementing solutions relying on the integration of digitalization. And we would like to ask you the learning coming out of those, and what you would recommend to scale those up. And Thomas, if you don't mind in your answer, also touching upon the question from Tarek on the extent to which we can deploy those opportunities in context where the infrastructure is weaker. Thank you, Thomas.
Patrick. So the digitalization component itself is relatively new in how we are implementing financial mechanisms. This virtual cold chain assistant is one of the first projects where it's the main component. But still, we have some lessons learned from the other business models we have been developing, and also the conversations we are having already today. And one of these is that it's really important to involve all the stakeholders with the design process of these solutions, because very often there are some stakeholders that we don't think about that might highly benefit as well from this. So let's take the example again of this virtual cold chain assistant, which is this tool that we're developing in India. Of course, it is benefiting smallholder farmers because it's increasing incomes and reducing food waste. Of course, it's also benefiting technology providers who can offer access to cooling and basically deploy cleaner technologies. But also, for example, digitalization can benefit banks and investors because it improves standardization, transparency, traceability, and monitoring. So what it does really is making these projects more bankable, creates trust, and so this unlocks financing, and this is a very important component as well of digitalization, and also to scale up these kind of smaller investments, which tend to not be large enough to attract larger investors. But with digitalization, it can be easier to use also smart contracts and bundle these into more appealing opportunities. A second component, and also a little bit then touching upon Tarek's question, increased digitalization in energy-related activities in the food systems does require a strengthening of the digital infrastructure and literacy improvements as well. In some cases, the digital infrastructure might not be developed enough, but luckily there are new, for example, mobile technologies that can leapfrog a lot of the heavy infrastructure, with which new solutions can be implemented really just with a smartphone and an application. And this can be very, very appealing solution in some cases where there are no other, even in some cases, no or limited access to the grid. And also something that we have been realizing or seeing is that it's really important to make any of these digital tools in the agricultural and rural areas open source, to make them accessible and inclusive, especially if we think long term. And that also means not only making the code open source, but also basing it on open source databases so that it can be operated and scaled up without additional costs. And just finally, maybe a third component of where I think there could be some important improvements is all of these digital tools and technologies generate a lot of data, as has been mentioned before during this conversation, and this can be combined with other information and then stored and analyzed to support decision making. But this actually requires, due to the amount of data, new forms of processing and analytics to essentially interpret past events and predict future events. And this requires, in some cases, relatively advanced technical skills, which need to be improved as well in governments and NGOs. So this is currently the private sector there's a big gap between the private sector and the public sector in these technical skills. That's also why we're really happy to work with data.org, which is this program funding the virtual cold chain assistant, because it's also a way for us to essentially strengthen, for example, us as an NGO, our capacity in digitalization, which we think is crucial to scale up these solutions.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I have a follow-up question for you, if you don't mind. And in the meantime, I realize that we've been granted an additional 5 minutes. So if any of the panel members wants to raise an additional point that was missed, or if the participants have a question, now is the right time. Panelists, just raise your hand if you want to say something before we close. Thomas, you mentioned open source, you mentioned the use of data, and at the same time, you noted that there are emerging business models that are available to deploy those solutions. Now, those business models, to be scalable, need to involve the private sector to a large extent, ideally. How do we deal with the fact that those private actors will not necessarily want to have their codes open source, will not necessarily want to open their data to anyone, let alone a public institution, to facilitate the issue that you mentioned, informing decision making and aggregation of data. Any thoughts that you can share with us around this tension that one could see there?
That's a very good question, and I think that's also the reason why we are implementing this specific project in India, because we know that there are tools available which are not open source and which are only accessible by larger farmers because they come at high costs. So in this case, we as a public entity or not-for-profit entity are essentially designing this and making it available open source, and making sure there is an incentive for those entities who use it, which in this case will be cooling cold storage providers, have an incentive to continue feeding this tool, and but still essentially making this sustainable through the other service that they provide, which is the cooling service. So they don't have an incentive in starting to charge specifically for that tool, because it enables them to sell what is their core business, the cooling. I mean, we cannot really avoid the fact that there might be companies who decide to add extensions to these tools and to make them maybe premium products, and then start selling this as a service, or selling this to farmers who might be able to afford it. But at least the core basic features can and should stay open source, and then private companies can always go and make more advanced products that then would be not open source and would be charged for fees.
Fantastic. Thanks, Thomas. Catherine.
Back to the market access question that we had from Byron, actually. So if we, if your question, Byron, was that how can we get farmers to use more digital solutions if they first of all have to worry about actually having something to market and bring to the market. I think there's digital solutions that can work in the agricultural sector, that on the one hand, on the farmer side, really using the information to become more efficient and have a higher yield. So managing crop cycles better and managing irrigation systems better. So that comes from a knowledge exchange and extension services via phones or other solutions. Then some sort of precision agriculture, although some, I would think that on an African level, it wouldn't be the one drop of synthetic, now I lost the word. Never mind. Anyway, so that's one thing. And then also on a consumer side, we're looking at maybe doing some sort of direct marketing, so which is already happening, and it's already happened, for example, in India, where women during Corona, as they couldn't go to the market, actually started selling their products directly via phones. So there's some solutions already that can happen and that come up, I guess, as a benefit, I don't even want to call it this, of the current crisis, where people had to become more creative when it comes to marketing their products.
Maria, Deepak, any last words?
I don't have anything to add. I think I mean only the need to have a more global view of what is happening around farmers. So basically, we have to act on the motivation and the competencies. So, and they are together. They are together. They are interrelated, and so I really invite having more studies and also more collaboration between academia and two technology provider in order to have a closer look at the mechanism impacting the adoption of a digital solution, especially in developing countries.
Thank you, Maria. Deepak?
Yes, one last recommendation from our side would be, of course, the cooperative approach between multiple stakeholders would be a good way forward. One thing would be let's say, to enable the pilots to take place in different places, so that we can have different test cases to understand how the technology is working, what kind of things that we can learn from it, what kind of mistakes that we can avoid in going forward, and also building up on that point, scaling up of successful pilot projects would be another way forward towards, let's say, a good level of achievement in terms of digitalization for global food systems would be that. And therefore, we definitely call for different financiers from both public and private sectors to make this thing possible, to empower the people who are working in the sector so that we can achieve it together. That would be the thanks.
Thank you, Deepak. We are asked to go back to the plenary. I don't want to close this session without thanking the panelists for sharing new insights and new experience. Catherine, Maria, Thomas, Deepak, thank you very much. And we see you back in the plenary.
Thank you all for joining this session. We have such a great group of experts. I'm excited to hear from all of them, from their perspectives, from the technology perspective, but also the implementation perspective. I am Katie Freeman. I'm a senior agriculture economist at the World Bank based in Washington. I work at the intersection of agriculture and energy in Latin America and Africa. As we all know, this is an incredibly important issue, right? So as populations grow and as there's a larger demand for higher quality, more calorie rich foods across the world, there's going to be a much larger demand for some type of energy. And energy is a key input into the production of high quality and also well preserved products. And that's something that companies, farmers, implementers are struggling with across. Also see that agriculture is a major source of GHG emissions, and that energy is a major input into agriculture and also a significant portion of agriculture GHG emissions. So a WRI report from 2019 estimated that about 22% of all agricultural emissions were coming from energy, and that's in addition to all GHG emissions that are actually coming from energy itself. So that is my brief introduction. I look at this from the perspective of how to do things on the ground, but also what is the impact that agriculture is having on the environment, and how can we try to mitigate that through some type of more advanced energy services. And all of that implies this big and emerging ecosystem in digital. So I'm going to ask some questions, and I will ask that each of the presenter or each of the discussants, before you speak for the first time, jump in and just give your 2-minute introduction, who you are, where you work, and sort of your experience, and then jump in for the questions. I can direct questions specifically at people, but we have a few great questions, and I think for the purposes of discussion, I'm going to ask that each of the participants just jump in when they feel comfortable answering the questions that they would like to answer. So without further ado, what are some different examples where digital technologies are being applied to ensure effective, sustainable energy use for food system transformation and energy access? So I will let our discussants jump in. Please, whoever would like to start, feel free.
I can start, I guess. Hope I didn't cut anyone now. Yes, hi everyone. My name is Hack. I'm Director of Business Development at SunCulture, based in Kenya. SunCulture is a solar-powered irrigation company that offer solar-powered irrigation solutions for smallholder farmers, together with some essential services as installation, after-sale service, and most importantly, financing as well. And we do this in-house in Kenya, and then outside we work with distributors. So currently in Uganda, Ethiopia, and Togo, we work for distributors who then distributes and offer those services to smallholder farmers. So yeah, it's a big question. Of course, there are so many different aspects of this, and without digital technology, we will not come very far, to be honest. And I think it is the digital technology transformation that has enabled a lot of solar home system mini-grids development to grow as we have. And I think Tobias definitely touched on some of these points. So a little bit on our perspective as a distributor and distributing and financing solar powered irrigation. I think as the first thing is, of course, on the target location, which Tobias touched on, the GIS mapping. And I think in terms of a good example there is, for instance, the International Water Management Institute, who has created an irrigation suitability mapping across Africa, which is free of use. I think that's a great example of technology where we can really use to identify where is irrigation suitability and therefore where is farmers, both in terms of long-term suitability for water users, but also for sales and to which regions to cover, to target. Apart from that, of course, I mean, anything from sales, the increase in smartphone penetration and the increased use of Facebook and WhatsApp has really enabled us to scale and reach our target audience in a different way, which we couldn't do before. And then from there, of course, integrating field application into our model where our field staff, agents, etc., can actually add in these clients and collect information in an efficient way, and then that being stored in a database has been super, super key. And as we all know, mobile money and pay-as-you-go functionality, where we can lock and unlock our products if a client is paying or not, is another very key enabler to be able to expand and further finance more and more clients. Above that, the IoT is also very, very key, to be able to do preventative maintenance, troubleshooting over phone based on data we can see that's coming in from the farmer. And that's going to continue to be really, really key to be able to scale, to continue to scale our distribution of solar powered irrigation solutions. So yeah, I will stop there with a couple of examples of what we use and how we work today.
Wonderful. I don't know, maybe Nora wants to jump in.
Yes, I can do that. Hello, my name is Wolfgang Rams. I'm co-founder and CEO of Africa Green Tech, and we are a developer, and we bring electricity to the villages right now in Mali, Niger, Chad, Senegal, and Madagascar, and more countries to come. Actually, we are not just bringing solar power to the village, but also something we call impact site, which means that we cover more than just electricity. We also have a system which we call Cooltainer and internet services, because the big learning we had is that it's not enough to sell kilowatt hours to the village. It's quite crucial. Think about the applications that sit on top of the electricity. That's especially where the digital demands come from. When you want to integrate the different, as we call it, impact side, you need to have a digital platform to enable the integration. There's a tractor driving.
Anyone who's not speaking, please be on mute. Nora, could you put yourself on mute, please?
Ah, yeah, thank you. that was an application working. No. Yeah, so what I'm saying is system, and therefore we need the integration of different components, as I said, kilowatt hours, but also water purification, cool chains. You all know that 40% the harvest goes to waste because of the lack of cool chains. So that's really a serious issue, and we are seeing this in our impact sites. Yeah.
Thank you. So Nora, do you wanna jump in? I don't know if you're, yeah, please feel free.
Sorry about that. I was having a bit of internet challenges, but I'm back on. So I hope you guys can hear me. Yeah.
With a little bit of background noise, it sounds like some sort of hammering in the background.
Oh, just give me a again, please.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Simon, do you want to jump in?
Hi, Katie, and hello, everyone else. So my name's Simon. I'm the CEO of a company called SEforALL. We take a slightly different approach, I suppose, to the energy and food system nexus. We we work both sort of upstream and downstream in the food supply chain. So what we do is we process food waste from a variety of different stakeholders. So it's from retailers and households all the way through to sort of manufacturing facilities. And we convert those organic byproducts into a variety of different products using insects. We're an insect protein company. Some people may be familiar, others not. But effectively what we do is we convert food waste, which is a downstream component of the supply chain, and we convert it into a variety of products. So it's fertilizer, animal feed, and fuel primarily, and then that's sort of how it's circular back to the sort of as an input into primary production, which is the upstream component. So, and we use, there's energy requirements in our process, and as a result, there's a big energy component to the whole process. And what we've found is that, I think the question that I think we're most appropriate to answer here is around the sort of the challenges that companies face, which I know it ties into the first question as well, but it's sort of maybe jumping the gun slightly. But what we found is that, we're from South Africa, so we operate in sort of sub-Saharan Africa for the most part. We've got other production sites, but for the most part, sub-Saharan Africa. And as has been expressed in the discussion paper for this event, you see a lot of food waste in sub-Saharan Africa and sort of developing regions happening pre-consumers, like along the supply chain. And that's a result of sort of inefficiencies in energy and just generally breakdowns along the supply chain. So, and then in developed countries, it's sort of the distribution of waste comes sort of post-consumers. So what we found working with private and public sector waste generators is that the supply chain just isn't industrialized enough. So that's quite a general statement. It's not always the case, but in a lot of engagements that we've had, there's just almost a lack of technical capacity, which is one of the points that came up on the poll, which I found to be quite interesting. It's difficult in that instance to justify the installation of a digital solution that can, we need sort of data to regulate the inputs into our process. So, we need to understand where waste is coming from different manufacturing facilities, and we need to have that data quite regularly. And what we found is that there isn't even a monitoring or production system in place currently, so we can't sort of piggyback on the end of it. So it almost needs to be like a development in the industrial base in order to sort of stimulate a digital solution. That differs by sector and by application. We'll waste the protein. Other companies like waste the energy, which is something very similar to what we're doing. They have that exact same problem. It's difficult for them to add a digital component to their offering when there isn't a strong enough base upon which to leverage. That has, to us, has been one of the biggest challenges that we've experienced. Is looking at a digital solution that can sort of look at the sort of food, primarily from the food waste side, but also from the energy side.
Thank you, Simon. Nora, do you want to try again with your audio?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me now? Is it okay?
We hear the same sort of feedback. It's not terrible, though. If you speak close to the microphone, we can hear you.
What about now?
We can hear your voice. The feedback is still there, but it's okay.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So, I'm so sorry. There's something definitely happening over here. I don't understand. But here we go. So I'm Nora Magero. I'm from Kenya. I'm the founder and CEO of Drop Access. We are a social enterprise that develop water, energy, food nexus solutions for African small-scale food producers. And our vision is, or essentially what we anchor our work upon is, obviously we want to switch smallholder food producers from using agent parts, because we've clearly seen the carbon footprint that they're leaving, and also they're aggressively still trying food production practices. The more they try, the more they're actually hurting the environment. So what we do is we switch them from these the engine pumps to solar solutions. But then also now there is the barrier of entry into using renewable energy technologies for these caliber of farmers. So what we do is we get them a single solution, a single centralized solution for a group of farmers. So we work with farmer groups, and if they need a solar pumping solution, they don't have to get individual solar pumping solution, no. Then we just get them one big enough solar pumping solution. We source for financing, we do the installation, and we do metered and prepaid.
I don't know if everyone else sees the same thing, but Nora is frozen. Oh, now we hear you again. Could you just repeat what you said at the end? You froze for a second. That you do prepaid solutions.
Yes, when we give them solar pumping solution, we pipe the water to the family, and they pay for water service instead of buying the solar pump or the solar utility, and essentially they're benefiting from a clean tech solution. And we just don't leave them there, because anybody who's worked with the low-income communities, especially smallholder producers, know that the myriad of challenges is just beyond access. You have to give it like a holistic approach to be able to handle the challenges that they face. So as much as we give them the clean tech and access to water, we also ensure that they get extension services. We just give them like the full support. And at the end of the day, the crops are grown and we've increased their productivity, we get them access to market. Can you still hear me? All right. So that is what we do in a nutshell. And the challenges that we face with trying to deliver such a kind of system in a country like mine, Kenya, is that there aren't really such flexible policies that have been effected to be able to, for us to be able to give this kind of holistic approach to smallholder farmers, because we still need support from our government to state that these are the kind of baby farm inputs that that the country just needs to stop, because these farmers still have challenges getting using counterfeits and still being duped by people who pretend to be extension services. But you find all this reason comes from there aren't really policies that will govern how smallholder farmers are going to conduct their businesses or how they're going to grow their SMEs. And further to that, we have quite some challenges with just the capacity, the technical capacity of what we do, because for us, our work is predominantly in the rural and off-grid places. So once we are setting up a system, we have to ship manpower all the way from Nairobi or the nearest city. But 6 months down the line, when there is a breakdown, either we have to ship in a technician all the way to come to the city, or we have to wait a bit, maybe if the technician is not available, or maybe we have to ship in a part from outside the is because of this lack of technical capacity to support this kind of work. The clients, or rather the smallholder food producers, get emotional exhaustion, and when they get exhausted like that, they just tend to abandon the whole system. And such kind of scenarios are the ones that are really hindering progresses to give smallholder food producers a holistic approach to climate smart agriculture and just sustainable ways of farming.
Wonderful. Thank you. Kareem, do you want to jump in?
Thank you, Katie. My name is Kerem, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Tarla. We are working in Turkey right now and trying to extend our services to neighboring countries like Eastern Europe, old Russian countries, as well as North of Africa. We are generating data for farmers and cooperatives. Actually, we share this data at the very beginning to sell to farmers. However, we saw that selling digital tools or data to farmers is not a right way to go in countries like Turkey or some emerging countries, because people are reluctant to use it while they have many other problems. So we changed our methodology and we made it freemium model. So nowadays people can go into and log into our system platform and get lots of data for free. I mean, those are very valuable data. They cannot find it anywhere else, because we tap into satellites, radars, sensors, web bots, drought data. There are some calculations that we are making, the prices of the exchanges. So all of those data are somewhere hidden, especially in the servers of the government. However, we go get it, fetch it, and deliver it to the needed bodies. So our platform grow. Now we have like 1,000 farmers inside, and this 1,000 farmer generates lots of data for corporations Those can be banks, insurance companies, cooperatives, food processors. Therefore, they pay us to access this data. So we change our model, becoming freemium for the farmers and sponsored by the big cooperatives or corporations or companies that deals with the farmers and the agriculture. Why we do this? Agriculture has a memory. So people would like to access this memory, but nobody can deliver this memory in a very strategic and ways or a systematic way. And also in agriculture, nodes are very disconnected. Farmers don't know anything about the fertilizer prices. The food processor doesn't know about the government decisions. Government most of the time doesn't care about the drought. So all of those nodes can be connected in order to provide a better services for farmers, for general public, for consumers actually. And we saw that farming and agriculture is an interdisciplinary process. So there is not only farmers involved in agriculture, but there are chemists, meteorologists, I don't know, computer scientists, engineers. Actually, myself is an engineer with MBA plus a computer science degree. So I love farming and I love to generate this data for farmers to be better off. So this is what we are doing, and I think I should stop here.
Thank you very much. Really interesting. I just want to add quickly that last year I had the chance to take a group of ministry participants to Korea to look and see what South Korea is doing at the intersection of energy, agriculture, and digital. And one of the really interesting things that they're doing is very related to what you just mentioned, how they're promoting engineers to get more involved in agriculture. And they're creating an environment whereby agriculture is not about the drudgery of waking up at 6 a.m. every day and milking a cow. Agriculture is now about using your smartphone to lay on a beach while you control your aquaponic greenhouse where you can make $1 million in 0.5 hectares. So just a little perspective too, that governments, as you mentioned, are thinking about how to use this data not only for the asymmetric information, but also how do you encourage these types of engineers, computer scientists to go into agriculture and energy and the nexus and create some of this innovation. So our next question, and Simon spoke a little bit to this already, but I wanted to give others the chance to comment a little bit on this. What are some of the challenges facing companies working on advancing digital technologies promoting the Nexus? Simon talked a little bit about the capacity. We see from my perspective at the World Bank that financing is a huge impediment, and that companies' access to finance and then upstream and downstream finance is a challenge for many. But I would love to hear from you all other thoughts on what are some of the challenges that are facing companies in this space.
Well, if I can start. Of course, it's financing that is that is a bottleneck, but it's a bit crazy to see bottleneck because I mean, when you just imagine that you can save 40% of food loss, you just can easily calculate how much income you can create by avoiding this effect. So what many people don't understand is that it's not just about doing good things or somewhere else. It's really about helping them to be productive. And I mean, it's not just being nice to invest in Africa. It makes a lot of sense because there is so much growth potential. So what we are always challenging, trying to achieve is really our investment money to earn, and not because we are greedy, but because there is value created, and that's we see Africa as a strong continent. We see huge potential there, and this is what we have to tell to our at it, and there's a huge potential. Yeah, that was my comment.
Yeah, I think I can time in and definitely, second. I mean, it needs to make sense for the business model to develop or digitalize part of the business. I mean, it needs to make sense in terms of impact, but also it needs to make sense in terms of the business model and the returns you get. And I think digitalizing your business and or develop software, etc., it is very expensive and it's very time consuming. It's not something you do just on the side. You need to be very dedicated and really understand what you do and what you want before you enter such a project. So I think that's one of the challenges, especially for startups. And they are, in our experience at least, not that many off-the-shelf product that works. So I think that's a challenge, and we also see that it's a very changing market. What you maybe need right now is maybe not what you need in a year time. So to have a modular approach within your company is very important. And then I think, of course, I think in terms of the nexus, agriculture and energy has historically been quite separated. We have, for instance, the mini grid solar home system company, and then we have the more agriculture focused companies. So I think when it comes to creating a software that are moving in between, that adds a layer of complexity, and the policies and the needs on the agriculture side are a bit different from the energy side. I think in generally, of course, as well, I think what we started to see as well, that more and more partnership is happening on the software side. You don't have to do everything yourself, which is great. Partnerships are also very complicated and takes a long time to build, and it's really hard to make it really, really fit. But I think at least we started to see that there are so many cool, amazing startups doing covering so many different aspects and parts of this chain, that I think partnerships and more collaboration is a good enabler. Thank you.
I would just like to echo what Hak said. It's really, really true. Like for you to approach the Nexus, you have to bring in so many partners so that you're able to successfully deliver something that is sustainable and also really do meet all the needs across the board, or maybe just your target market. Okay, what I see quite a challenge is now when you're coming up with your partners, it means you're bringing in different entities from different sector altogether, and all these entities have to come onto sort of one solution. And most of the time, you have to find like a base load of some sort. You have to find like a middle ground, and that becomes quite a bit of a challenge. Like you see somebody developing a microgrid that is going to support a solar pumping system. Then you have to bring in another partner who will be able to probably come and put up a cold storage solution to act like a base load literally for the microgrid. But then you find that the financing structure that the cold storage provider has does not really marry with what you're trying to provide for the farmers. So it really does take a bit of time to be able to work with partners and find like a middle ground, and also just to try to fundraise the different functions all together, and it becomes quite a bit of a challenge. Very essentially, what I've seen is when you're trying to approach the water, energy, food nexus, you can't do it all alone. You have to find a middle ground. You have to find that perfect union, or rather marriage, with the different functions, with the different interdependencies to make it actually be successful. If you're going to come up with a digital solution that is going to govern all these, it does take a lot of time. It does take a lot of financing. It actually does take a lot of skill required. And if you work in a low economic environment, you might actually miss on so many aspects. Like you might not have the right skill set. You might not get the right even personnel to be able to even manage the system. And you find yourself having a dream or a way, or rather a path of how to really tackle the issues affecting the sustainability issues affecting smallholder farmers, but then you don't know, you can't get there. There's usually a fence or a barrier that is stopping you from getting there. Yeah. So that would be my contribution.
We found that in our particular case, operating in sort of sub-Saharan Africa, that capital markets are just not nearly as deep as they would be in sort of developed markets. So, finding access to infrastructure finance is really challenging. Our digital solution is as it is, I'm sure, with a lot of other companies working, is that it's sort of a means to that the actual physical asset installation. So we'll have like a data set that will inform the installation of, say, for example, an energy project. But what we found is that we can put together a really nice digital framework that incorporates data sets that are really are quite impressive. But there's too many risks. There's sort of political, social risks attached to it, and that makes the sort of infrastructure, the financing, the asset financing, really challenging. And that needs to be something that I think is a key piece to the puzzle in terms of making the sort of digitalization more pervasive.
I think that brings us around to some of the specifics. So thinking a little bit about the design factors. So pricing, consumer services, product performance, availability, economies of scale, partnerships, social dimensions. What do you think are some things that make digitalization successful or not successful? And you all have mentioned some already, but if you have thoughts on what other aspects can make this particularly successful. And I'm going to ask that Karim come in again.
Okay, thank you, Katie. So every country, every farming community has its own rules. So there is no one size fits all solution. First, let me tell you what we experience in Turkey. People are cultivating like a land of 5 hectares. So this is very tiny compared to United States, right? Maybe it is larger than the Kenyan area, but it is in the middle. People in United States or in Europe would like to be financed by the pockets of the farmers, so they can afford the digital solutions, the technology, the satellite data, whatever it is. However, in emerging countries or developing countries, these digitalization tools should be sponsored by the corporations. Actually, those corporations are already making profit by use of farmers' abilities, by contracting farming and some other means. So once they sponsor farmers to use digital tools, everybody better off. Actually, as a startup, I earn money from the corporates or corporations. Farmers can decide wisely what they're cultivating, how to behave to their farms. And at the end of the day, the factories, the food processors or banks or insurance companies can increase their profits. So this is a win-win situation. While designing our platform, we offered freemium model for farmers. They can register into our system, which costs like $1,000 in the United States, because we provide them satellites, the radar, the drought data, the sensor data, and there are lots of stuff. And the money for the financing of those tools are coming from the corporates like insurance companies, banks, which would like to get the data to decide better. And also there's another issue. You can segment your farmers wisely, because some are cultivating very precious materials like wine, or I don't know, some nuts or figs, so they can sell with high prices. Whereas there are some others who cultivate like wheat, maize, or barley, so they don't have these profit margins. And instead of putting a sensor in their field, we can achieve the similar results by use of our machine learning algorithms. So we use forecast models, weather models to have similar results. So instead of paying €1,000 to a sensor, we can achieve the same stuff like a couple of dollars. So this is another aspect. And partnerships makes digital tools better off because everybody has their own expertise. For instance, we are working with a fertilizer company, plus a maize cultivator, plus a pesticide company. So if we can bring all of this data into a pool, then we can provide a package for a better decision support. And lastly, there is a social dimension. Farmers are helping each other in our system. If a farmer puts a data in our system, then neighboring farmer benefits from that data. So farmers know that once they share data, they will get much more precise data, plus they are going to help their community. So this is another aspect. So we are very transparent in those data sharing, the finance model of our platform, and at the end of the day, everybody is happy because everybody earns from the system.
Maybe Wolfgang, I don't know if you want to come in and mention from your perspective some of the things that make it successful or not.
Well, I mean, of course, we have to have in mind that at least in sub-Saharan Africa, that are living in the villages are not able to read and write. So if you want to enroll them in some kind of mobile app, you have to make sure that you use a man-machine interface that is easy enough for these people. So yeah, that was one thing I wanted to add on that. Yeah. I mean, and again, it's not enough just to take your products that you have developed for your local market and bring this to Africa, in our case. But you really have to understand the local conditions. You have to understand the social situation and the situation in the village, and that's quite crucial. And this also true for digital products that you offer there. Yeah. That was the thing I wanted to add.
So we have a question in the chat room, and please, anyone else who would like to come in, feel free to also comment on what you think makes a successful model. But one other aspect I wanted to sort of add to the conversation, and it's a very relevant and pertinent one, is the current context, right? So we are all in a unique situation. We are all in the same situation, living in a global pandemic. And that global pandemic has concretely and famously disrupted supply chains across the globe. One of the comments that we have in the chat is how, and this is to Simon specifically, but anyone please feel free to chime in here, how any of these companies, data and digitalization in general, could think about ameliorating some of the fluctuation of waste that the pandemic has created. So disruption of workers in restaurants, for example, lack of open access of traditional trade partners. We saw this across Latin America, where all of a sudden, all of the pigs had to be slaughtered, but the borders to China were closed. And so what happens there, right? Do you have enough cold storage to be able to deal with this once in 100-year type of problem? Probably not. So just your thoughts and comments on how what we're talking about, specifically the digitization, is necessary, pertinent, and maybe useful in this specific context, and where it has some gaps. And I'll let Simon come in first.
Sure, so that's a really good question. We we've seen tremendous volumes of waste have been generated as a result of COVID. You know, you've got primary agriculture companies that have got silos full of food that, you know, they run on a pretty tight regimen, and then all of a sudden you can't export, or all of a sudden you can't sell liquor. Like in South Africa, there was a ban on alcohol to keep hospitals, you know. So that had a huge impact on the sort of waste generation across the supply chain. And a lot of the companies that we work with, that was quite commonplace before increases in waste rather than reductions in this. And I think digitalization has a role to play there, just in terms of maybe how it's managed. You know, being able to forecast exogenous events like a pandemic are really difficult, and that is a different set of technologies maybe. But I think if you can be up to date and in real time as to what that waste stream looks like, and how the food system is compromised in real time, I think that allows downstream applications to function more efficiently. So if, for example, in our case, if one of our partners says, look, we've got a lot of waste and they phone me and they tell me, that's one thing, because the communication channels are very slow. Whereas if it's on a digital solution, and I can see in real time exactly how full the silos are, what's in there, and how much would need to be allocated and pumped to this different system, this container. That way we can reduce wastage effectively by having a more real-time analysis. So with companies that do have digital infrastructure, which we do work with, and they're fantastic, so we can piggyback on the back of that, we have a lot of transparency into their production system, so we can see it. Whereas companies that don't, and it's more manual, it's typically a delay. It's typically someone will call you a couple of days later and say, oh no, we've got extra of this, like, can you take it? And it's like, look, it's too late now. The same applies for other inefficiencies in the supply chain, for other companies that are managing this waste, their energy or composting, for example. It often complicates that process. So it can sort of add a lot of transparency and ultimately reduce it.
Hack, I don't know if you want to come in here on your thoughts on network planning related to a global pandemic and COVID.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I had a classic Nairobi power outage here.
Oh, no, sorry. We were just talking about how all of this relates to the current scenario in the pandemic, and how networks and data and planning and digitization can help to ameliorate some of the specific issues we've seen during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think obviously in terms of, for us as a sales company, reaching client through software and available digital platforms available is key. We come from an industry where maybe in the sort of home system space, a lot of door-to-door sales, or we as Sun Culture very often sell as a group sale where we invite almost like a little gathering. Of course, this has to be limiting now, so maximizing the usage of the platform. And I think, of course, also over the years, the number of people, the percentage of number of people with smartphones in East Africa and everywhere essentially has drastically increased and continue to increase as well. So that's definitely very, very key. I think on digitalization, going back a little bit to the partnerships, to be able to integrate each other's platform to get access to a different kind of farmer network as well. This is also a bit on the sales and marketing perspective, but this can make the whole transition much faster in terms of reaching the client. And I think in general, a lot of these changes has already been done with digital money, our IoT products as well, where we can actually try to troubleshoot a product over phone through the IoT data that we have, instead of actually had to go to a client every time there is a problem. So a lot of the transition is happening already. And I think, the COVID has just increased this significantly and just put more pressure on all of us to scale up our systems and continue to make it more efficient so we can meet our clients' expectations. So I think it's many ways, it's things that had to happen, but now it just put some extra pressure on us.
Nora or Wolfgang, I don't know if you want to comment specifically on the current situation.
Yeah, building back better now after the pandemic, and just trying to mitigate how farmers are really affected, like the case of the big farm. I think we've really learned the importance of partnerships and capitalizing on partnerships, because if you can perform one function, then maybe your partner could find a way of performing it or helping you out. And that has really come in strongly, so that we're able to bring up more resilient communities, or even we're able to bring up with the products that we're giving to smallholder food producers will actually is able to live through a pandemic. And yeah, I just support the issue of capitalizing on partnerships, and also just trying to well, this is the argument of, do you really build like a cold storage solution during just a short period of time? And well, from what I look at it, obviously I do not know the scale of how some farms are and how they're affected, and what really how much waste that resulted into. But I feel like governments can come in strongly to have emergency fund for such kind of situations, just to help to ensure that this kind of SMEs are resilient. So if there is an emergency need of building up a cold storage solution, and a government can actually finance, obviously my Kenyan government will be very, very, very skeptical of doing that, but I'm sure some are much more developed and much more structured. And if governments can actually finance and also put in policies where there is allowance for SMEs and companies and startups to be supported during a pandemic, then I think that's a way of just ensuring that we survive, we are resilient, like we still remain even post-pandemic and don't close shop. Yeah.
On our side, there are two major learnings that we took from the COVID pandemic. The first one is that the virus was not such a big issue. Then the COVID measures have people in sub-Saharan Africa rely a lot on money that comes from Europe, and as these people lost their jobs, they don't have access to that money, so they lost somehow, let's say, a stream of funds. But the positive thing was that as we are providing a decentralized offer, and as our villages are very much decentralized, the advantage is that they did just not have any problems with COVID, because the sun was still shining and our villages, they still had electricity. So that was the good thing. It just showed that decentralized concepts are much more robust than centralized solutions.
We have one more minute. I don't know if Karim, you want to come in with any final thoughts.
Thank you.
You're on mute. We can't hear you.
Now you can. Okay, thank you. So
no, we can't hear you still. You're still on mute.
Now?
Out of interest?
Oh.
Yeah, me too.
Interesting. I can't hear him, but please go ahead.
Okay. So during COVID, what we learned, farmers tried to get their grocery shop by use of applications. So they started to use applications and understand how to use their smartphones, apart from the WhatsApp and Facebook. And then that was very advantageous for us, because we have an application that shows satellite imagery of their farms. And they love the idea of having their vegetation health every week delivered to their pocket phones. So our usage rates goes up, and that was very beneficial for us because, as you know, the digital tools are demanded during the pandemic duration, and that's a good sign for our company, where digital tools can be consumed even with the farming community. So pandemic was a positive thing for digital tools and for our startup.
So we have 5 more minutes, and I have, if no one else in the group or if the chat has another question, I have a final question, which is that my perspective from the World Bank supporting country governments, we have a variety of options, many of which you all have touched on, but I would like to hear from you the way that you see the role of government, and Nora talked about this a little bit in the context of the pandemic, but the way that you see the role of government supporting the work that you're doing or supporting the private sector, whether that be through creating an enable environment, better access to data, access to financing. What are a couple of the things you think that a government could do to help facilitate the work that you're doing in the innovative space with digitization?
Well, of course, what we need to have is a regulation environment that is clear. I mean, that's a no-brainer. We have to have, let's say, a situation in the countries where you can plan with, and we see that many governments are really working on this, but of course they have to speed up, at least in Africa, in the countries where we are.
I think we've, for a long time, we found that incentives have been in place for various industries that, made it feasible to start off with. And over time, as we've reached economies of scale, it became, viable in and of its own rights. You saw that for, a lot of different sectors. And I think that would be a really, there are incentives currently in place with specifically financially with things like green bonds that are, although they might not be the most effective instrument, but they do exist, and which, it basically, whether the public sector has a big role to play there, but I think it should serve the form as an incentive for the private sector to crowd into these industries, rather than making it the responsibility of the government itself to actually own and operate and facilitate. They should offer some sort of, and I know they do in certain regions, and in South Africa they do offer incentives for renewable energy investments, those types of things, make it attractive. And that, then what it will do is it will increase the industrial base in those areas, and then give them, once they're more established, give them their own legs upon which to stand to then develop into a fully fledged.
I could just add that governments can really help in building capacity to be much more robust, because they have a very good position to put up structures to enable building technical capacity by even doing technology and knowledge transfer with other countries or other other technology providers. They can sign treaties and say, hey, Germany or maybe Europe is going to train Kenya on solar or digital, just so that even as we are coming up with these solutions, we're able to get, the market is actually favorable to be able to support our work to scale up at a widespread. Because we find that if you are a startup or just an organization trying to pass a digital technology, you still have the burden of having to train or having to build capacity around it so that you're able to survive. And sometimes it eats into your financing and your funding, and it becomes a bit strenuous. So if the government can provide capacity, can just ensure that a country can build its capacity in various technical sectors, then that would be great to support us.
Well, I think unfortunately we are out of time. So I see in the chat that we are headed back to the plenary session, but I just want to thank all of you so much for this great discussion. It is a privilege for me, and I'm sure for the participants, to get to hear from all of your perspectives and to have you interact with each other. And I look forward to maybe having the opportunity to chat with you all more in the future and to the plenary session. And thank you to all of the organizers for this great conversation. So see you in the plenary.
We have the thematic issue here of digitalization today, and I think Tobias, your presentation actually was an excellent scene setter also for, especially for this breakout group here already. I was thinking initially, should I introduce each and every one of yourselves, but maybe you do that yourselves in a quick, let's say, intro round we're going to do now, just so that the other participants who are in this room, which we can't see now, but they are here, also know basically who you are. And then I would just kick it off with the first question. And let's say, as a general rule of procedure, please feel free to chip in whenever you think you want to add something to a discussion, so that it's not only a question answer session basically for the next hour, but that we kind of really try to engage in a discussion. And if we want to dive into a specific subject into more detail, then let's do that definitely. So on my screen, Tobias, you're the first one here. I think you can do your introduction quite quickly because people know you already from the plenary session.
Sure. Thank you. I'm Tobias Engelmeyer. I'm founder of TFE Energy and of Village Data Analytics.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome to this group. William, I have you next on my screen here.
Thanks, Alexander. Hello, everyone. William Brandt, the Chief Campaign Officer at Power for All, which is a global campaign working to accelerate the adoption of decentralized renewables.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Then I see Harvey here on the screen.
Harvey Jacobson. I'm an investment director at Sunfunder.
Thank you. I'm the owner of a dog, as we learned before. And then we have Bolek. Please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bolek Stoicki, and I'm a senior advisor at CEDA in the Power Africa team, previously with one of the CGIAR centers and AGRA, so very much at the nexus of energy and agriculture.
Okay, thank you. Pleasure to have you on board also. So, and then maybe to my person, my name is Alexander Hack. I'm team leader at NDEF, and NDEF is basically an energy access program focusing on sub-Saharan Africa, but active in basically 3 bigger regions in the world, so also Latin America and Asia. I'm responsible for what we call the country backstopping, so basically overseeing the country operations in all the countries that we are present in. And it's my pleasure to be the moderator of this session today. So maybe just to dive in quickly, digitalization, we hear a lot about it. Tobias, in your graph, one could already see that the amount of data traffic basically that's being produced in the internet is kind of skyrocketing and exploding exponentially. To us, I think here, working on the subjects mostly predominantly on energy access, the question always is how much dividend does that actually bring, the whole digitalization that we can see in and around the world, and how easy actually is it to leverage these effects or the positive effects that we, let's say, normally do assume also in the more complicated settings that we try to operate in. So I think it's a very opportune moment to discuss this also. It's a very interesting question. We will for sure not be able to find answers to all the questions we might come up with actually, or that we might run into during the session. But I think definitely it's one of the major issues going forward for the next years that will still stick with us, and that actually has a lot of potential to really ramp up the results and the impacts that we want to achieve. So let's maybe start with, let's say, the more easy question, the normal critical challenges that you can see in your day-to-day operations, in your work, and the projects that you are implementing when it comes to renewable energy, access or upscaling of renewable energy. Before we then dive into the connection of digitalization also. Oleg, maybe you want to start with that question basically as a kickoff. Major barriers you see, you can of course already make the kind of the connection to digital solutions down the line.
Yes, well, your question is certainly easy enough. The answer to it is very complex and elaborate, however. Of course, the challenges that we see and that I have seen also in my previous engagements and capacities, the range, obviously, and I think that was mentioned in the plenary, from financing, access to finance, the cost of capital, and the various reasons why the cost of capital is so high because of the perceived or actual risk. So that is certainly a major challenge for many SMEs which operate in this space. Not only do they operate in a rather innovative space, which is the renewables, and as such it is perceived as a risk by the financial sector, but especially if they want to venture into rural areas and work at the nexus of agriculture and renewables, well, that becomes just a bit too risky for most financial institutions. So the cost of capital for them is incredibly high, obviously, because the cost is a function of the perceived and actual risk. But of course, there are other sets of challenges, also when it comes to adoption rates, when it comes to understanding of the solutions, of the technologies. Therefore, the uptake is a bit slow. This is also what we experience. So there is a great need for technical assistance initiatives, and also, and this was also alluded to in the plenary. It's the demand, so the offtake. How easy is it to find anchor clients or anchor customers that would be able to generate the kind of turnover that those companies would be looking at or would need to actually become and remain profitable? So it's a very broad answer. And I would be happy to discuss it further. I don't know how much time you've allocated to me. I could talk much longer about this, but maybe I'll stop here at the moment.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I don't really have specific time slots allocated, but let's just see. I'll try. If we overextend too much, of course, then I have to step in my role as moderator. Avi, maybe from your perspective, from a Sunfunder perspective, what in your perspective, like, is this something that you could go along with? Basically, what Oleg was mentioning now, a lot of basically risk that is still out there that somehow would need to be accounted for, and that is a big barrier towards greater investments, or do you maybe have any other takes on that issue?
Sunfunder has been lending into essentially distributed renewable assets for coming up on 8 years now across a couple of different funds. And whether it's doing standalone solar home systems or sort of larger productive use, solar irrigation, or even cold storage powered by solar to allow farmers to store their food before going to market, aggregate, and find prices. A lot of the issues are very similar, and you're always going to be exposed, or almost always exposed, to smallholder farmers. The primary customers are as rural areas, because they're the areas that tend to be the last to get grid connected, or can't afford, or be an undergrid. Whatever the case is, a lot of the sales are going to people who are outside the urban and peri-urban area when it comes to energy access. So we've had to find ways to get comfortable with that risk. Some of it comes through getting used to the business models and just understanding that where traditional financial institutions are nervous, that becomes our opportunity, because it's part of it. It's a too hard basket. So we look a lot towards banks to get involved, and banks are not risk-taking institutions. Banks are scaling institutions. Once something has become boring, that's when you get a bank in there and you scale it infinitely, especially as you can make access for local currency and make it work. But once it becomes boring, it becomes bankable. That's not a bad thing. It's just understanding the role of banks, I think, in the economy. And that's where it comes in. Where you deal with institutions like Sunfunder as we're trying to help systems grow, trying to understand what the risks really are. And this gets into a lot of the digitalization and how that's helpful. Part of that goes into, what Tobias mentioned in the staging, the sort of rampant access of computing power. What we don't have in the sector is huge track record. There's not the equivalent of credit scores. A lot of times the customers have no banking record. So to the extent that there is an ability to track the digital payments through their mobile money and sort of see their flows through their account, or just leveraging computing power to run hundreds, if not thousands, of simulations on a financial model to sort of test it for robustness, as a substitute for looking at a history of hundreds of thousands of loans into a similar business model. And we see that not just in our sector. Even if we look at mRNA vaccines for COVID-19, part of the rapid development was based on a digitized map of the genome combined with millions of rapid simulations based on our scientific understanding. So it's leveraging computing power to do some of this work for us so we can enter the market and expand much more quickly. The other piece, which I think is really important, is with all this digital data and the improvement, is it's a tool. And going on the stage in question and some of the introductory discussions we've had also around getting insights from your data is great. Getting actionable information on which to base your decisions is even better. And that's, I think, an area where experienced investors in the region and in the sector like SunFunder have an advantage. It's working. But a great example, and actually a panelist or company that's on one of the other panels right now, SunCulture, SunFunder client, they do solar irrigation on a pay-as-you-go model, as well as selling it to other companies that will sell their units on a pay-as-you-go model. They have agronomists on their staff, because how do you tailor, how do you find the right customers, how do you understand it, what they're doing and what they need? And if you're looking to help farmers increase their crop yields, both to increase food security across the region, increase resiliency to variations in rainfall, which are only increasing due to climate change, not just in terms of amount, but timing. So when you're dependent on rainfall historically, if those patterns change, your whole farming system changes, unless you've got irrigation and pump irrigation that can stabilize that for you. And that's where expertise in the form of agronomists on staff as part of the sales and review cycle is really important. So you have this information. Do you have people who can turn that into actionable insights that matter for the decisions that are important to the companies? So you can assess how their process works, and also to the end users. And we're obviously at the key for all of this and try to improve their lives, improve it. So these are all, I think, key features of how SunFunder reviews and makes our decisions.
Okay, thank you very much. So I take basically, so initially, let's say it's also a bit of a mindset issue then in the financing sector. I hear from you, it's about having access to the relevant data. Actually, you are mentioning the credit scores. So if you actually don't have a credit history of a customer, how do you actually know is it a trustworthy customer or not? But then towards the end, we were diving a bit into the solution parts already, and I take it that qualified staff, of course, also something that still is needed on the ground, even though you might have access to a lot of data. If you don't know how to interpret that data, that's of course also then a challenge for you. So very much, let's say we dive into the business operational part a little bit, the financial side now, also with what Harvey just mentioned. So William, maybe to put forward the question to you from a more, let's say, global advocacy point of view, what in your experiences is actually hindering the massive uptake or upscaling of renewable energy applications currently?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously affordability was already discussed, cost of capital, ability to pay, those things are obviously have been identified very clearly by, in the Lighting Global Pulse report. I think they said that affordability was the main barrier. Essentially, we have a addressable market of $11 billion for processing, storage, and irrigation, but a serviceable market that's just 6% of that, right? So, and the main barrier being affordability. But I would say that, to add on to that, there's been discussion around risk. The remedy to risk is a good business model. One of the things that we've been finding through the work that we've started in Uganda is, so in Uganda, just as background, we've created this platform of intersectoral stakeholders from government, finance, civil society, donors, private sector, and brought them all together to essentially reach a consensus as an industry that spans both energy and agriculture on what the priority barriers are that need to be removed to scale the market there. And we're in the process now of prioritizing those barriers, and then we'll be sequencing how to remove them as a group. And many of the things that have already been discussed were on that barriers list, but business model was brought up again and again. And I think that that's a big issue that needs to be addressed in certain parts of the value chain more than others. But the other thing I would just say, and the whole reason being for trying to set up this platform in Uganda is that a big barrier is that everybody's working in their silos. There's a lot of reductionist thinking based on, what the energy sector feels is needed on a demand side, what the agriculture sector feels is needed on a supply side, and what the ag people feel is needed on a demand side. And we needed to bring them all together and try and, create a common language, as well as a, common objective about what needs to be solved as a group, right? Because if you continue to work in those silos, it's going to be a barrier to market growth. And I think that, we're trying to model that in Uganda and then and grow it into as many markets as we can. So I think that would be another barrier that I would highlight.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Yeah, we will need to follow up bilaterally on Uganda because we're also starting something there in the agricultural value chain on POE actually. So that would be quite interesting to learn from what you've been doing there already. Great. Maybe moving towards a little bit towards the, let's say, solution stage already, Tobias, maybe with your next intervention here. I mean, you outlined the case, I think, already in the opening towards the plenary for why you decided to actually go for, yes, let's say, a very much of a data-driven approach with your current company. But maybe it would be good here for the audience if you could outline in a bit more detail, and maybe you have some initial experiences already, how the access to that data and the interpretation of that data is already helping decision makers on the ground, and of course also businesses to invest more than before into these kind of technologies, or at least into the sector as such.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Alexander. Let me give you two examples, perhaps, of how we are doing it currently. One example is when we work with. So currently we have two types of customers. We have organizations that plan, DFIs and governments that we work with that plan off-grid electrification at scale. And on the other side, we have the companies that actually provide solutions, and they're mostly mini-grid companies at the moment. So I'll give an example of both of them. In the first example of how do we scale, what we see is that when we work with governments, we usually are there's the current understanding of where what the problem lies. And if you remember that slide that on the blank slide on that we're working in the dark, that's very applicable there. In many countries, the government doesn't really know where the people live and where people are connected to the grid, and therefore they don't know how to best electrify them. And there are now many of the countries, not only in Africa, but also in Asia and in Latin America, are working on larger electrification programs, and they need to choose whether they want to extend the grid somewhere or go for a distributed solution. And they don't really have the toolkit to choose it. So in the past, they just went for the grid extension as a solution. But for a variety of reasons, the distributed solutions that kind of most of us here are probably working on have become much more competitive and quicker and easier to implement than the grid solutions. So we need to create a framework within which they can first understand what the problem is, where the problem is, and how they do it. So it really starts with identifying where villages are, and then the second step is identifying which village is connected to the grid, which one isn't. For which we use kind of this algorithm we've developed. And then you can say, okay, now you have certain parameters. You say you want villages that are this far from the grid are to be electrified in an off-grid manner. Villages that are closer to the grid will be electrified by the grid. But creating that basis for data for decision making is absolutely crucial, because it's the difference between flying blind and having real a substance to work on. And then when we work with governments, we find that the data that's currently available to them, both in terms of survey type of data, IoT data from the grid that they have, and the GIS data that links that to a point in space, that is it's very inaccurate. So when we work, there's a huge earlier step where we start to clean the kind of data sets and bring them together and put them on the platform and visualize them in order to then start doing our analysis. And then this can go all the way into upcoming tendering processes where you can now say, okay, we've got a set of not 10, 20, 30 villages that we want to electrify, but we have, in the case of Ethiopia, we've identified 1,800 villages. And so it helps to create a sense of scale, and mini-grid developers can start working with that data. They can trust it more for various reasons than they could earlier trust earlier government data. So they can actually bid on it. So that changes the game there. If we work with mini-grid developers, it's a slightly different situation, because then we go into the village and we help them outline, create almost like a digital twin of the village. And we do that for larger villages, for example, in the DRC or in certain parts of Ethiopia, but also in smaller villages. But especially in the larger ones, you then want to understand, there's an ongoing conversation that mini-grid developers have with regulators or local authorities on where they're allowed to build, rights of way, all these kind of things. And with this digital twin we're creating, we can help them to dynamically adapt the design of their system. So they might decide to build one large grid or 3 smaller grids. They might decide that these are the ones that are most that are ideally connected to the grid, and other users are possibly not don't have enough demand for a mini grid connection. So we help them to right size the system and give them a flexibility on the engineering side that they didn't have before. And then they're using that. Arvin, I'd like to know whether that reaches all the way to you, but they're using that to then interact with investors and funders to say, okay, look, we've actually done a different level of due diligence than before.
Very nicely. Harvey, please.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in because that's the point. So SunFunder has actually done some investments in the mini-grid sector. I think where the connection, or sometimes the breakdown in connection, because I know it's been a frustration amongst mini-grid developers and advocates because they, as Tobias mentioned, there's a lot of potential for meeting needs much cheaper than the grid with mini-grids, but access to finance has been difficult, and in part because the business models are new and not really well understood, which makes it very hard for debt investors such as SunFunder. Despite our experience in the sector, in the region, our local presence, not only 61, actually I think we updated, like 60+% of our team is African, based in Africa. Our main office is in Nairobi, but we have people from across the continent on the team. And yet still, it becomes hard for us to understand, and where I think the use of some of the new analytics tools, and whether it's from leveraging satellite data and other sources, some of this comes into what are the cash flows in the area that are available to pay the mini grid for its services, which could then be used to pay us. And this goes into anything within the sort of agricultural sector or the food sector. If at the base your primary sources of income for a lot of the population is going to be from smallholder farmers or people, like how do they get paid for their product, and what are those cycles? Different crops at different crop cycles, and also in different regions there's different income cycles related to that. It could be that the first yield they have from their crop is actually all going to pay back their seed loans, which means none of that's really available to pay much of anybody. Or it could be most of it is all bought up by co-ops, whether private or through like a centralized government buyer. So how do those cycles work? How does that money come in? And at some point, are you underwriting against the co-op risk, or are you looking at the farmers and crop yields? And there's, it's incredible watching the increase in service providers looking at that, whether it's crop insurance firms like Pula that are trying to take that information and make it accessible. And even if we take, like the climate companies example from the US, where starting off with crop insurance, the information they need to underwrite the insurance product turns them into incredibly powerful consultants for the farmers, because now they've got, just through their analytical engine and, machine learning tools they've done to take and compare, they can tell a lot about when to plant your seeds, water, irrigation needs, fertilizer needs, how to sort of optimize. And so there's a lot of room for improvement that can become a positive feedback loop. But at its root, we need to understand what the likely cash flows are of the mini grid. And to understand that, and for the mini grid developer to understand that, they need to really understand and share that they understand what's going to come out of the community. Even if there's an anchor product, how does that work? What is that? Are there opportunities for food processing on site that could yield higher value products for the community, and also more stable income and source of load for the mini grid? So that, I think, tends to be a disconnect. And it's not only in the mini grid context, it just becomes helpful here. But it's the same question if you're a solar home system company just selling standalone products for residential use, or even from micro businesses that farmers use for additional sources of revenue, or just informal workers in the community. But how the supply chains work, the connections that often do happen between the formal and informal sectors in the region that yield to, ultimately work down to how the cash comes, back up to our client. And the tools are emerging, but that is an area where greater connection needs to be made between developers, service providers, and ultimately investors.
Okay.
And some of that's going to come with time.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Harvey. Very interesting insights here from your perspective as well. Yeah, definitely. I think it's also important, of course, to understand in the end the product basically, have the business case ready, and then the exchange of information is crucial. I think, William, that also buys a little bit into the argument that you were coming across with overcome the silos. So try to connect more across different sectors also, but also between the different, let's say, elements in these supply chains that are going to be served. Oleg, maybe from your perspective, do you have maybe a good example for how digital solutions could overcome these barriers that we were discussing initially?
Well, yes, I mean, some of the solutions, because really one needs to assume a holistic view here, and when we are talking about introducing mini grids in rural areas, in the African context, we also need to make sure that the potential users, the smallholders, effectively, will have the means to pay for the service. And it may be that we also need to be looking at their productivity levels, if the seeds that they are using are really going to yield the kind of income and the kind of quality of the produce that is needed for them to be able to sell the produce, and then therefore generate the income that will enable them to pay for the service for electricity. Some of the technologies that I've been working with in some of my previous jobs were all digital and obviously energy enabled, such as mobile-based and digital-based messaging services to smallholders that were strengthening their capacity, which then in turn resulted in higher production. In this particular case, I'm talking about the dairy farmers in Tanzania that were working with a large dairy producer, processing company called Tanga Fresh. So the mobile network, the access to mobile network, the ability to charge their phones enabled those farmers to get crucial information about markets, about the prices that they could catch for the milk, but also about husbandry techniques, for example, that in turn, as I mentioned, increased their yields, increased the quality of the produce, which then in turn generated additional income that could sustain a energy provider. So that is one technology that I would like to mention here.
Yeah,
there's of course many more examples.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Mark. Again, I think speaks also for the issue of information at hand that people need, and that which they can get access to actually via these new digital solutions. Be the picture for the more geospatial areas, be it the numbers for making your business case kind of bankable, or be it, let's say, direct literacy based information for a smallholder farmer in Ethiopia or so, to better understand basically how he should plant his crops or her crops. So I think that's a very good overview basically we have here already. And William, I think you up front before this meeting also mentioned that also in Uganda you were working on some geospatial planning elements. Is that also a project that's related to energy access? Could you maybe shed some light on that solution?
Well, I'd rather comment on a different topic though. So just briefly, what I'll do is I'll share in the chat a policy brief that we wrote specifically on Uganda, which talks about some of that geospatial. Essentially, it was a meta-analysis of existing geospatial data that came from IEA, IFPRI, FAO, et cetera, to really look specifically at what are the high impact intersection points for mini grids, and in this case, maize milling. And so we're in the process of continuing that analysis and deepening it, as well as expanding it into other crops, because each country has different crops, each region of each country has different crops, and you really have to get into crop-specific data and meta-analysis to sort of get to that decision point that Tobias was talking about. But I also want to just talk about briefly around, what are the roles for sort of digitization, servicization. I don't even know if that's a word, but servitization. I think I was talking with Toby Peters. I don't know if you've talked to him before, but he does a lot of work on cold storage. And what he made a great point the other day, that what we don't want. So essentially, what I think everybody is starting to understand very clearly is that aggregation of smallholder farmers is critical to scaling these energy solutions. If we don't aggregate, you're not going to make these things affordable, right? It's a seasonal business. They can't afford it. You got to aggregate in order to scale. The problem with aggregation is that you could end up with 4 to 5 companies that control the market, right? And that's not what we want. What we want to be able to do is feed 10 billion people while protecting the 1 billion people who actually produce the food, right? Rather than consolidating that in the hands of a small number of companies. In order to do that, you need aggregation. And that's where I think digitization has a very important role to play. I think one of the other speakers in another panel from BASE, Thomas Mottmans, I was talking to him earlier about some of the work that they're doing in India around cooling, and they're developing an open source app that provides weather conditions, cooling facility conditions, market conditions on a real-time basis to an aggregated group of farmers who can then use that information to then decide, okay, how long do I want to leave my produce in a cold storage facility and optimize the sale price, right? So I think that that's a great example of what digital technologies can do. And one other thought, just as a point of discussion, really, is just that my sense is that there's been a lot of business model innovation and digitization on the front side of this issue around irrigation and irrigation as a service, and on the backside in cold storage. But where we really need a lot more innovation, including on the digitization side, is on the sort of missing middle around processing. And I think this also gets to what Avi's talking a little bit about in terms of mini grids and how do you scale that processing component, right? So I think where I'm very interested in understanding and doing a lot more sort of thinking around is that processing piece of the food value chain.
I could jump in real fast.
Processing food, you mean? Yeah, okay, please jump in.
Sorry, just one other area I think in the industry that digitization is happening quickly. All these things that could analytical tools. I think one area where we collectively do need to catch up, and this is true on the investment side, and I think surprisingly on some of the business side, especially on the smaller businesses that local businesses that we all want to support and see grow because incredible local institutional knowledge, is there's some data literacy issues, and that catches a lot of people, and it's a problem all over. I was lucky to accidentally end up in some business to intelligence implementations in one of my prior jobs. So, had to learn very quickly about how some of this works. And we still, at Sunfund are, very aggressively are trying to improve our internal analytics capabilities. But you've seen a lot of hand waving where people, I've seen companies where the pitches talk about, we can do all these things, and they'll show up a fancy dashboard. And like the output is kind of meaningless, but the colors and are really nice. And people get intimidated quickly, or they talk about how they can do whatever, or they collect whatever data. And I think there's a lot of importance in finding out and people understanding what's real, what's not. Is this actually, a presentation for a pretty slide, or is this someone demonstrating, incredible capabilities? Is this getting us to decisions that are actionable, on the business side, on the finance side? improving the farmers, give them actual inputs on how to do things, depth, maintaining, what irrigation levels they need. Is their system working, in a way that's understandable? And so I think that's sort of up and down. We talk a lot about financial literacy. It goes along with offering credit to unbanked populations and making access to finance part of this. But I think a piece of that also is a little bit of teaching data literacy, because I think we all, myself included, sometimes get taken in by the hype and kind of miss what's real. And that's just always just an overarching thing that we need to pay attention to.
May I say something to that, Alexander?
Avi,
yeah.
Sure.
So you're completely right, Avi. Although and there is a lot of fancy visualization out there, especially when it comes to agriculture, and there is and it's not really. I mean, so there are two challenges here. One is what's the quality of the prediction, how accurate is it, the accuracy level, and the second is the granularity. Is it granular enough to allow people to actually make decisions based on it? And we are working on this, and in agriculture we're currently just working through this, and it's not easy. We see how difficult it is to get reliable information on crops, on yields of smallholder farmers using satellite imagery, which is what we do. And we are working currently, for example, with the World Food Program through this. There aren't. It's not something that has been cracked at scale yet. But I'm very confident that we and others will be able to crack it quite soon, because the technology is really moving ahead rapidly, and there's so many smart people all over the world working on it, including the work you're doing, William, in Uganda. There's quite a lot of this, and there's different. So there's the satellite capabilities increasing. There's on-ground data sets that are increasingly being made available, etc. But in a kind of a general level, I see there are, and coming to the data literacy part, I think if you look at it in three kind of process steps. One is kind of data, the second is analyzing the data, and the third is making decisions based on that analysis. I find that if we look at the data availability, that is probably the biggest challenge and the biggest issue at the moment in these very data lean environments in which we work. Our experience has been that whenever we interact with organizations and companies that have data, with some very notable exceptions, but in many cases, that data availability is not good. It's just not much, and it's if you look under the hood, you find that there's far less data of usable quality than everybody involved thought earlier. That is changing slowly as well, but it's just important to kind of as a reality check at the moment. Then on the analytics side, there is a lot of that's perhaps somewhat easier because there is a lot of global analytical capability from all kinds of other industries that one can tap into. These are kind of general skill sets, but applying those general skill sets to the problems and that are relevant in the industry that we're talking about is a challenge. So you have a lot of smart people doing smart things with good data that aren't really solving a problem that we are having in the field. And then on the using it side, using the analytics side, that literacy, I would say, goes further than what you just described. It's not only to differentiate between what is good and what is bad, but to actually make people use data, interact with the data, through that learn what it can do, what it can't do, where it's good, where it's bad, how it's progressing, how it's improving over time. And I can only speak for us. The more we work with people, the more we work in projects, the more we interact, the better everything becomes. The whole process becomes better. And that's the real promise of it, is that it has the potential to improve rapidly. And so we can get to a different level to where we are today in 1 or 2 or 3 years.
Thank you, Tobias. Very interesting. Yeah, I was just thinking, are there other potential risks maybe also associated now with this? So what I hear also from the audience now is data literacy is definitely important. You don't want to end up just with let's say, a data, I don't know, gathering tool, and then you cannot really actually interpret the data. That's key. You need to connect the dots also, because having a data set, interpreting only that data set will probably not bring you very far if you need to solve a problem, especially if it's on a bigger, let's say, more society level also. Also, of course, the policy decision makers in the end, they will need to take into account a lot of different aspects, and so providing one key set of data for one very specific problem might help. But if you look for the bigger solutions, you probably need to take into account different views, different information in the end. And that brought me to a project that we are currently conducting in Uganda, actually, where we are trying to bring together credit reference bureaus and paygo companies also, and of course also the government, to address the risk factor. I think that Avi also was mentioning upfront, to try to bring down the risk assessment, to give the paygo companies actually better understanding of the credit worthiness of the customers. On the other hand, we are of course also discussing, if you expand that, the financial literacy with that, and you expand basically the base of people who could potentially have access to a paygo system, you of course also run into the risk of over-indebtedness of these people, because if these people are not really quite qualified to get a full grasp of what the consequences of a certain contract actually mean for them, and if it's the first time, for example, that they enter these kind of instruments, it's hard to oversee for them. And then that's of course, let's say, also a risk that we could be running into potentially, which we are also thinking about how to actually mitigate that risk. Yeah, so basically trying to address one risk sometimes also opens up another risk that you might not have thought about before. Yeah, in this case, in terms of over-indebtedness. Are there any, let's say, major risk that you would see now also that we would need to take into account? I don't know, data protection or any other, let's say, avenues that we could actually end up running into that we don't want to actually run into when trying to utilize the strengths of digitalization?
I think from Sunfunder's side, we're very concerned about end user privacy, because we do actually take a lot of data from our clients. So if they are doing some type of pay-as-you-go model, and that mini grids in some ways, or like on service payment model, I should say, to sort of capture whether it's mini grids, distributed, like a cold as a service type of business model also, where whoever's hosting it is usually paying the service provider, or the traditional pay-as-you-go solar home system. In many ways, there's a lot of fundamental similarities. And from a finance point of view, we do like to get the raw payment data. There's a lot that, as you mentioned, once you're in someone's data systems, you learn a lot about the company. Once you're kind of just looking at it, understand how they've set things up, it tells you a lot about how they thought about their problem, how they designed their database. That in itself is just a great sort of diligence, and it becomes a philosophical discussion in many ways. But when we're collecting data from them and some sort of get automated updates, we should not be getting private customer data. So some companies, they think that through ahead of time, and they'll make sure like this is what we need, and they share, they'll query their own database, they'll give us an extract or give us access. And other times we've gotten just a massive list of all their raw account data, including people's names, phone numbers, and that stuff should not be shared. So, some companies are conscious of that and some companies are not. But I think the privacy issue really is important, and something we take seriously at Sunfunder about what we want to hold and what we collect. And so it's about thinking, what do we need to get this information for different levels of the value chain? As a company extending credit to a consumer, you need that data. As an intermediary, you need different data to do it. But I think it's thinking about the problem and decision you need and setting up a collection list that takes into account all these equities before actually taking the data.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much. Looking at the time now, because I think we got like 6 minutes left now. Could I maybe ask for a kind of closing statement? You can take into account when I just pitched kind of the question on risk, but you can also go for any other, let's say, kind of last messages that you would like to post to this forum. Maybe Bullock, I can ask you to start with that, some key messages from your side towards the end, because in 5 minutes we would need to go back to the plenary and do the back reporting, basically. Please, the floor is yours. Sure, thank you. Although I did see that William is raising his hand, so maybe he wants to go before.
Is it okay? I have to. I apologize. I let the organizers know that I would be leaving early. So just a final point on the question of data collection. I think that we often fall into the trap of being very supply side minded in the energy sector. Just a very clear reminder that this ultimately is about demand side data. and the quality of that demand side data, to Avi's point. And I think that there's absolutely a use for top-down data analysis based on whatever data set you're using, but that bottom-up piece is a huge gap that desperately needs to be filled, and it can't be filled on an aggregated basis. It really needs to be localized by crop to different communities. So it's a big challenge, and I think that there needs to be a lot more resource put towards that. Thanks, you guys.
All right, thank you very much, William. Thanks. Oleg, then please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Alexander. So my closing remarks would be really about highlighting the importance of taking a sort of a holistic view and realizing that there is no silver bullet when it comes to this space. And I think, sort of as William alluded to, it's also about paying attention to the demand side and understanding the customer, understanding the needs of the client, and the ability to design services and products that really respond to those needs, because only then will we be able to generate a market and also help the client to increase their income and therefore get the entire industry going. So yeah, no silver bullet. We need to take a holistic approach.
Thank you very much for that. Well, Tobias maybe, and then Avi.
Okay. So for the sake of argument, let me give a techno-optimist point of view. And I would say, I have the hope that data and analytics behind the data can be a silver bullet, that it can actually change fundamentally, structurally. Sorry, I just make an argument. It can change fundamentally how we do it, how we currently approach both agriculture and electrification in remote areas. We have to change how we do it, because with all due respect, we're not doing good enough. We're just not, right? We're not achieving our global goals. And I see that the data, we didn't talk much about, we talked about data sources and how we react to individual data sets mostly, but we didn't talk much about the data analytics, the potential AI layers that can, the pattern recognition that can come out of that. And to what William was just saying on the demand assessment, that's something that we're doing already today. We're using different indicators to predict demand, and we are getting results that are in places, right? It's not globally validated, but in certain places that are promising, that are much more useful than not having those results. We've just done work, for example, with Vijay Modi and Jay Taneja's team on demand assessment in Kenya. So I have very high hopes, and it goes back to that one slide I showed, because also that there's a lot of tailwind we get from the technology development.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Tobias. Harvey, please, then the floor is yours as final kind of closing remark of this round.
Sure, I'd say Sun Funder stands in between the two. There's a background as an engineer. I definitely have techno-utopian leanings, but in the end, all this, all data, everything, no matter how big your data set, how fancy your, pulling tools from non-structured things within a giant data lake, in the end, this all exists in a context of the end user. And we like to work with companies that understand that, have a local presence, and understand that granular issue. Even if you're collecting lots of data from all different sources, you need to understand in the end, it's got to be oriented around that end user, where the techno-utopian side, what's exciting, and I think some of the best companies we've started to work with and seen is, internally, they managed to use technology. And this doesn't mean fancy AI or machine learning, but just basic scripts to automate repeated manual tasks within the company, which allows the team to be much more productive, hiring smart people who can focus on thinking rather than doing just repeated busy work because this Excel needs to be pasted into another Excel. There's a lot of stuff that they can use with just the technology to improve their processes and focus on client services and analysis. The types of jobs that creates now is a lot of improved data analyst jobs. That's massively growing. And that's not just sort of an informal job. These are formal jobs that are going to be created as this grows, because there's as the amount of information increases, the ability to analyze that and take actionable insights from that is going to grow as well. And if a company can leverage the technology to improve their processes, that's where you can have margins that makes this scale really effectively. If you need to hire a lot of people to do just repeated manual tasks, that's not effective. If you can hire people to improve your productivity and constantly find ways to grow your productivity by leveraging technological tools better, that's going to improve everybody's experience and make these companies more profitable. So that's where we get excited. We see companies that actually know how to derive insights from the information they have, know how to implement that effectively. And some of that is just old school skilled management that just using modern tools to do it better.
Okay, Harvey, thank you very much. So in a nutshell, before we just jump over to the other room, I would say so digitalization is still early stage, but it's very promising. It has a lot of upsides to it, basically, that we're just starting to dig in. We're just scratching the surface, basically. Currently, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. We also discussed that in basically different setups. Also, we need kind of a holistic approach. We need to focus more on the end user and less on the supply side with everything that goes with it. So what do people need actually to understand that? We need to try to find solutions, of course, that can go to scale actually, especially on the smallholder farmers. And then last but not least, the old classical, let's say, technical skill set is still something that is also in the 21st century in a digitalized environment still very important. So people need to know the instruments that they are working with. So with that, let's say I would invite all of us to go over to the plenary. I'm very excited to see what the other groups also discussed, and I'll try to feedback that information now also to the plenary in the next minutes. Thank you very much for attending today. Thanks to the speakers. Thanks to the audience. See you in the plenary.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to everybody who answered our poll. It seems like really the three options that we gave are incredibly important to all of the audience. However, improving technical skills was the #1 answer. So on this note, I will invite our moderators to click on share audio and video so that we can bring you over. I see that Alois is here. Hi, Alois.
Hi, Annalise, how are you?
Good. Did you enjoy the session?
Yes.
Okay, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we are still missing Katie. She's joining. Okay. I suppose she will be joining soon. Shall we proceed, Annalisa? Okay, thank you. Yes. Thank you so much, Annalisa, and let me take the opportunity to welcome the moderators of the breakout sessions, Group 1 and Group 2 and Group 3. I was wandering across the discussions, and I'm going to sort of invite you to share, with us some of the summaries of your discussions. Allow me to start with Alexander. Simply because I got lost in not lost, but I got so excited with the conversation around enablers, with all these issues of data, and also the role of government, and the issues of risks. Now we have issues with Facebook and all these things, data being the new form of capitalism. Would you please share with us the summary of the discussions from the enablers session? Thank you.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, Aris, for giving me the floor. Also, thanks again to the invite to the organizers here for inviting me and us to this session. I think it was a quite interesting discussion we had, and of course, the time was too short, as always, in discussing these digital solutions here in the 21st century. So let me try to summarize in brief. We are still at an early stage. That's what we concluded. We are still in a very early stage with regards to digital tools, and we all also need to get acquainted with it. But there's very big potential to have these digital solutions actually helping us in overcoming the problems that we are facing currently. So be it, information for geospatial planning, or financial information that you can use more extensively than in the past, or just normal literacy information for smallholder farmers on how to increase their crops. These are all, let's say, solutions that are out there already currently, and we just need to basically take these opportunities and implement them. But of course, there are also challenges around. And so we figured, of course, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. So relying too much on digitalization will, of course, not help you in overcoming a very complex problem that's normally also rooted in society or in politics. So it can be, digitalization can be an enabling factor, but it's, of course, not a solution, a core solution, let's say, normally for the problem that you might be having. Also, the end user is coming much more into focus when you talk about digital solutions, which of course is an advantage to a very large extent, I would say. So there's a much stronger focus on what do the people actually want? What is the end user actually requiring? How can we actually help them? So that definitely helps, but of course you also have some challenges when it comes to privacy issues, data security, you process, you store a lot of data, and I think the picture that we got initially from Tobias with the traffic in the internet increasing exponentially is a very good picture for that. So end user focus is good, but there you would also need to ensure that some safeguards actually are applied, so as to that people don't lose trust basically in your technology or in your business model. Brings me also again to the skill set. It was the key finding here of the slide also, and we also discussed that still a lot of skill set is needed. So data literacy, I think we called it. So having information is good, but it's even better if you know how to interpret that information and how to disaggregate it, basically how to identify the relevant information for you, for your business case, or for the policy that you want to craft or whatever it be. Yeah. So let's say, even though we are moving into a very digitalized century, let's say the old school technical skill set is still something that definitely also will be required down the line in order to make digital solutions, let's say, at least part of a bigger scalable solution for the energy access problems we have still in the 21st century. So I will close here with that quick summary of our discussion. I'm sure I missed out a lot of things, but this is all I can do for now. Thank you very much. I'll back to you. Yeah, you're muted, by the way.
Alex, perhaps we'll give you a second bite of the cherry. Especially, I wanted to sort of discuss the issue of risks, perhaps more in more depth. Let me invite my colleague Patrick to give us a summary of some of the discussion that came from the global perspectives.
Thank you, Alex. So the panel discussion around global perspective. There are 5 points that I would like to bring to the plenary. The first one is the realization that the innovation wave that we are facing now is unlike anything we have seen before. It is bigger, it is broader, it is deeper, it is more extensive, it is more disruptive, and I think one needs to have that in mind and realize the adjustments that are required in terms of the institutions, the skill sets, and the people around this. There was a point made that innovation should be people-centered. That the innovation is only useful and the deployment can only be successful if the approach is people-centered. And that, if that is the case, there might be a way to circumvent the issue of the digital divide, mindful that digitalization in many cases allows to deploy goods and services to the underprivileged, which was not possible in the absence of digitalization. Related to that, we also discussed, like in Alexander's group, data. And we discussed data from the perspective of who owns the data and what is it used for. And particularly mindful of the fact that many of those interventions require some form of subsidy at the moment. So there is a public intervention there, but for those, for the deployment to be successful, it has to be largely in the hands of the private sector. So the data is often in the private sector. How can we ensure equal access to the data? How can we make sure that the data that is primarily within businesses' hands can be used to inform policy and other decisions that are more in the public sphere? In terms of specific sectors or application, there were a lot of cases around post-harvest loss, which we know is a key issue where digitalization can have a significant impact in trying to reduce those post-harvest loss and have multiple benefits. And then finally, we also realized that there are financial mechanisms and business models that are emerging around digitalization. And this is very useful in that many of the investments that we are talking about are too small in scale to be appealing commercially. And digitalization allows to bundle those. Digitalization also allows to access new consumers and possibly consumers that are in need. So a significant impact of digitalization on new financial mechanisms and business models that are being applied to deploy those solutions.
Thanks a lot, Patrick. Katie, allow me to come to you last, this round, simply because the countries' voices are so important and you don't speak before the countries speak, according to our protocol. So please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to all of the participants. It was a really great discussion and great to hear from the countries that we had together in the breakout group. We talked about 4 major things. The first were technology. So we talked about the use of big data, of network planning, how and where things need to be electrified in different countries. We talked about the importance of cold chain in reducing food loss and waste, solar irrigation, information systems to ameliorate asymmetric information in various different ways, including between farmers and markets and between governments and farmers. We talked about business models. So like the other groups, we talked a lot about food loss and waste and how reduction of food loss and waste is in itself a business model. Reducing food loss and waste helps people to be more productive, and that's a huge value created, and Africa has a huge potential to do that, to create more value. It makes sense to digitize business models, but it's expensive and time consuming. So it can't be something that you do on the side. It has to be a primary aim for the business, and there are not many off-the-shelf products to do that. We talked about how the market changes quickly and how it's important to have a modular model to be able to keep up with the market and to stay relevant and current. And we talked about how in the agriculture and energy space, they've always been quite separate. And there's different needs on the agriculture and energy side when it comes to technology and when it comes to data. So it's hard to make it really fit. But there are a lot of great startups who are covering the nexus between the two, and collaboration is a great enabler to be able to join the two areas and focus in this nexus. We talked about some of the factors for success in being able to invest in these areas. And one of them is that partnerships are really key. So in order to develop something and deliver something sustainable, there need to be strong partnerships created. In the way that partnerships are important, we also talked about finding anchor loads or base loads. So the idea that agriculture is an anchor load for energy, and in places where we're looking to electrify rural areas or concentrate some type of energy solution in rural areas, it's needed to, an anchor load or a base load is needed to be able to create that concentrated demand. And in order to do that, we need to create partnerships. We talked about the need to create sustainability with small farmers, and that sustainability is one of the factors for success. Capital markets in this area are not deep. Infrastructure is one of the things that has financing, but digital financing is more challenging because there's no physical asset. And oftentimes financiers see that data sets and the creation of those data sets with information is too risky. So it's challenging to find financing for that area. And there's no one size fits all solution, that this is very, very varied, and that different solutions are needed to be tailored to each of these specific things. Finally, we talked about the current situation with COVID and how this has kind of changed the game for many things, including international value chains. We got a great question from one of the participants, how data has helped ameliorate some of the problems created by COVID, and talked a little bit about how real-time remote monitoring of food locations in silos or in aggregation centers can help data companies and can help marketers know where food is located, and can start to help reducing some food loss and waste in a situation of crisis like this. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks a lot, colleagues, for the summary from the breakout sessions. I think we have 1 minute to go, and but there's still a question that is burning inside me, which was sort of triggered by Alex and Patrick, and also Katie referred to that. The issue of data ownership, and also the issue of who has to make the investment. Do we have any success stories on where data is generated in private hands but end up being given to the public sector, so for the public sector to be able to play a facilitated role to grow the use of data in the use of digitalization in agriculture? Because so far, each of the companies, they go to the market, they develop their own data, some of which is not complete, but also they keep that data in their own sort of server. Do we have any cases of any success stories where such data is then given to the public sector for the public sector to be able actually to facilitate a more, a broader scale up of some of these initiatives? Anyone who wants to take it, take up the question. Patrick, please.
Thank you, Alois. So not concrete on data, but there was in the discussion in a panel the mention of a project that developed open source tools. So the tools that are generating the data, if you want, so the step before the data, and that would be a mean for making those tools widely available, not only to public actors, but to the broad community, to generate those data and then disseminate the data as required.
Hey, Alex and Katie, anything you want to add on that?
I mean, we didn't really specifically talk about that, Alois, and at least not let's say with that angle. Of course, talking about the example of Tobias with the geospatial planning instruments, but let's say I think that's another level of data. You are rather asking of, let's say, the data that's actually with the end user that maybe companies have, and that they provide to the general public to benefit from it. So we didn't discuss it in detail, but I think that could be an interesting model actually for a pilot to be implemented in one of these countries in the agricultural sector, to basically give back the data, let's say, to the society, to the people, and then also to see whether in fact the data is actually also being used to transform, societies, or I don't know, change policies or something. Because again, one side that we discussed is there's a plethora of data actually available, but the question, what do you do with it, still remains. And so you would still also need to have people and to have an approach to make sense of that data, to interpret it, and then act upon it. Thank you.
Katie, you want to briefly relate to that?
Sure, just 1 second. We talked about data as a public good and how one farmer sharing his or her data can help the farmer next door, and how the role of the public sector in this is really to create an environment to crowd in private sector data, knowledge, communication, innovation. From my experience at the World Bank, this is something that we are challenged with often. How do we shift private sector data sets to the public sector and allow for sustainability there? I think it's something that we're still working on, but that there oftentimes is there's success with an intermediary being able to monitor and ensure that the data sets are transferred, and then the longevity within the government that the systems are maintained.
Thank you so much, colleagues, and thanks for the rich feedback that came from the breakout sessions. I will not try to summarize this, but I will just sort of give an example of how I experienced the limitless capabilities around innovation that digitalization brings us. First of all, I'm currently reading this, the latest book by Bill Gates on how to avoid a climate disaster. And it gives a very interesting perspective on, I think chapter 6 or chapter 7, how we have to reduce the 19% of the 51 billion tons of carbon that we that we meet on an annual basis, and the role of data in that. 10 years ago, my grandmother told me to buy a phone. So I went to the shop here in Vienna to buy the phone that I thought would actually suit her needs. The phone where there's big numbers and it doesn't have a smart screen and the like. So I carried this phone to my home, some 13,000 kilometers from where I work here in Vienna. And when I arrived there, I was shocked that my niece had bought the latest phone, which will swipe, which has WhatsApp and the like. And she was actually capable of operating that phone, WhatsApp, and all those things. To me, digitalization does not only help, help open a tsunami of innovation, but also it helps people to grow younger and to become innovative and even to do things that I think would not have assumed that they are capable of doing. Thank you for this session. I find it quite enriching, and I would want to take the opportunity to thank the organizers for the Vienna Energy Forum for this session. Thanks a lot once again, and I wish you a good afternoon, good morning, and good evening.